Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers, sisters, friends, and the foes out there. Welcome to the first episode of season 4 of the Blood Brothers podcast with your host or co-host today, Dilly Hussain. Before I introduce today's co-guest, I want to remind all the avid podcast listeners that you can find this show and all 3 seasons on all the major audio platforms. And if you're tuning in via YouTube, don't be cheeky. Do remember to click subscribe. I say today's co-host, I say today's co-guest because the first episode of season 4 is going to be a bit different. You'll be hearing a lot of me talking and some questions for me to answer. But similarly, I am honoured to have the very prominent and well-known right-wing journalist, broadcaster and former member of the European Parliament for the Brexit Party, Alex Phillips. Alex, greetings.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Yeah, so where do we begin? I mean, you'd have seen some of the things I've said about, and I think it's a fear that a lot of people have in this country, that the existential fear, I suppose, that a culture which is inherently foreign to their own has come over here, hasn't necessarily entirely fully integrated, although I think Islam is as varied as one would say Christianity is when it comes to how people practice and what people believe. And people are very concerned in the United Kingdom, really whipped up, especially after all the pro-Palestine protests. And so I wanted to sort of ask you your position on this, whether you think there is a problem in the United Kingdom where there's essentially one culture not fully integrating with the other, and whether they are at odds with each other, where there are frictions and tensions, and what we need to do to resolve those.
Thanks, Alex. That's a great question to kick today's conversation off with. Do you make a distinction between integration and assimilation?
Yeah, I think I probably do, actually, because I think one can integrate without entirely being exactly, mimicking and doing exactly the same as the culture, but be part of it. And I think assimilation, however, is adopting more mores and customs. I would be a bigger fan personally of assimilation. I think it helps in society to have a sort of a dominant culture that everyone adheres to. I think that really helps with social cohesion. But I think what we're seeing in some pockets of the United Kingdom are people who don't do either. They don't integrate, nor do they assimilate. In some instances, there are people who don't even learn the language.
Do you think that's restricted to Muslims only?
No, I was going to say this covers a whole sort of a gamut of people who have come to make the United Kingdom their home. But I suppose when it comes to Islam, and of course many races are represented under Islam, all races, there are elements that people in the United Kingdom fear directly contradict or bash against, really, fundamental, I'd say especially liberal attitudes in the West. And that's really, I think, at the source of most people's existential panic.
Sure. So let me answer the first question, which is, do I believe Muslims have integrated? If they haven't, why not? If they have, how so? And then we'll get to which values or beliefs that, your ordinary white British non-Muslim would see as some kind of threat, existential or otherwise. I'm of the position that Muslims have integrated. If someone asked me, Diddy, do you think you are an integrated Muslim in British society? I know many critics and detractors would laugh at this, but I swear to you, I believe I have. What does integration mean? Integration means the ability for a new group of people, racial or religious or otherwise, come into a new country where they are the minority and they are able to coexist and survive and contribute to society. That's the most basic term of integration that I see. In that regard, I think Muslims in Britain have done that. You see them present in pretty much every sector and every industry. Very stark change from that of their forefathers who were cheap labourers, worked in factories during the 60s and 70s. You'll see now Muslims, British Muslims, predominantly from South Asia, but not exclusively so, within the NHS, played a critical role during the COVID period, in the legal industry. So they're present. And not all of them are practicing. That's another thing I want to also clarify as well. When we talk about Muslims, you're absolutely correct. We're not one monolith. We're not one group. There's racial differences, ethnic differences, cultural differences, political differences, theological differences. So yes, we're not one, broad brush group. However, that said, specifically to United Kingdom, the largest number of Muslims from Britain, and I'm going somewhere with this. We're not short of time today, are we?
No, we're not.
Okay. And a bit of history is important and context is important for both our views. And that is the largest group of Muslims in the United Kingdom, 65 to 70%, somewhere there or thereabouts, are from South Asia. The largest group of them are Pakistanis. There's about 1.5 million. Then it's Bangladeshis, which is about 652,000. Then it's Indian Muslims, who are mainly from Gujarat. What automatic link do you, Alex, as a white British woman, connect to those countries from those regions to your heritage?
I would assume that if we were going to go down the route, it'd be colonialism, British colonialism.
How long ago was that?
I mean, really, it started unpicking midway through the last century.
When did it end?
In terms of...
When did India get its independence? 47, right?
Yeah, right, middle of the last century.
Would you regard that as recent history or old news?
That's still quite recent history.
Last 100 years, right?
Yeah.
Right, so we're here. Most of our forefathers came in the 60s and 70s. Whether you want to debate upon invitation or not, or under whose mandate or not, they were certainly incentivized to come. And they did. They did not come with the intention to stay. They came here to earn some money, support their poorer family members back home, and eventually go back. Now, with everything that they faced, right, which would have been somewhat arguably inevitable, you come into a foreign country, the former country which colonized you for 200 years, so naturally people may not be so warming and welcoming to your coming, to your arrival. Irrespective of what they faced, they decided to stay. They brought their wives over, or they got married here. And that's where our history for the largest group of Muslims begins, right? So I believe Muslims have integrated. I mean, look at Nadia, Great British Bake Off, Amir Khan. We've got a Muslim mayor who's pro-LGBT in London. You can't get more integration than that, Alex, yeah? Now, assimilation is something different. Assimilation, as you rightly highlighted, is more of a kind of subscription to a kind of single set of values or a kind of a consensus base of the majority, right? And you believe that would be better, right?
I think in terms of my
Assimilation.
life experience, yeah, my life experience in general, where I've lived and worked in lots of different countries of the world, where you tend to have countries with the least amount of social friction are those where you have a very dominant culture.
Agreed.
Where a lot of people sort of all gravitate around that.
Agreed.
Because there's just fewer differences between people, whether you're looking at let's say the rights of women, social attitudes in general, even when it comes to just having a laugh, sharing humour, it very often helps for there to be a huge cultural tie. So in terms of if I went to live even in Italy, let's say, I probably wouldn't necessarily find the same jokes funny. I don't have the same sort of hinterlands.
I think you and I would have more in common than you and the. Sure, there might be social practices that you might have similar to the Italian and the European or your white Western cousins, but I think there'll be certain cultural banter. Yeah, which I think you could have with me and not your random Italian or Mediterranean. Yeah. Would you agree?
No, totally, for sure. And perhaps that is the defining element of Britishness, because that thing between us is Britishness. It's sharing that same upbringing, watching the same programs on television, being able to, gas about how rubbish the 20-mile-per-hour zones are, whatever it may be. But there is something uniquely happening in Western Europe at the moment. And it's interesting, you talk about when the first sort of the big wave came from the Commonwealth.
That was just me setting the scene.
Setting the scene. It's a good scene to set.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, because actually people, when they came during that period, I think largely came wanting to buy into the British dream. They wanted to come to Britain because they felt they had connections to Britain, albeit colonialism, and let's not get into a discussion now about the rights and wrongs of it. That'd be a whole other episode. But they came and bought into the concept of a British dream and have brought up children here. And like you said, they work in the NHS, they become politicians, they own shops, a whole range of every profession imaginable. But in more recent history, something I think has largely changed in this regard.
Indeed, it has.
People aren't coming here for the British dream. Increasingly, people are coming as economic units. They're coming because they think this is where I can live a more comfortable life. I can have more money. I can have a better house, all the rest of it. But they don't need to necessarily anymore buy into the concept of Britain. They don't need to buy into the concept of being part of this society and sort of interwoven within its fabric, because they can live as economic units only. They can never really learn the language. They can just listen to the broadcast media from back home on the internet. They can send their children to faith schools where they're therefore not being educated or living alongside people from other cultures. And this is where I begin to think we find tensions in society. I mean, when it comes to things like faith schools, when it comes to that being, for me, I think, a very important part of kids growing up together with everybody in a country. And I don't even like the fact that you've got such a classist system in the UK, frankly speaking. But where do you stand on that? Do you think it's okay for Muslim children to be educated only with other Muslim children?
So there's other faith schools that exist in the UK. You have Jewish faith schools. I think Hindu faith communities run their own type of faith schools. And, you know, when you look at outside of Europe or the Western world, because you spoke about economic units, you know, this kind of increase of, are we talking about immigrants or just Muslims? Or both?
I suppose immigrants in general
Okay.
in this
do
regard.
Do we accept that, even though we're not going to cite, I don't have any data at hand, but I would say that a significant number of the migrants that are coming would be from Muslim majority countries?
I think probably.
Yeah.
I think the most recent migration flows would suggest
so, like,
that,
you know, when you look at the economic unit bit, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't think people from Iraq or Syria or Iran or Afghanistan, some of the places where many of the migrants are coming from, but they're necessarily coming for the freedoms of British society, right? Or, you know, when the Tory government during Cameron tried to find, I'm not sure if it is still defined like this, fundamental British values was like democracy, individual liberty, mutual tolerance and the rule of law. Do you remember that period where they were trying to enshrine fundamental British values? I don't think the vast majority would be coming able-bodied, healthy men who can work in their respective motherlands, that they're necessarily coming for those values. It would be for a better life, primarily a better economic life. Now, we'd have to look into where they're coming from. Now, the countries I've just mentioned are intrinsically linked, whether we like to admit it or not, Alex, to British foreign policy. Some of the, Iraq certainly is, Afghanistan certainly is, Syria less so, but most certainly still very much involved. We supported regime changes in certain parts of the Muslim country. We allowed, like Libya, Syria very early on. The British government knew that, at least during the early period of the Arab Spring, that young British Muslim men, some of them were going to Libya and more so in Syria. They knew that, but it aligned with the foreign policy at the time. So Britain, sadly, my country of birth, where I do identify to some element, to some respect, I am British. My government's hand has been in those said countries. Now, whether we talk about, oh, but they could have just slogged it out, or they didn't need to have to come, or the neighbouring countries could have absorbed them and so forth, and all those arguments, right? The point is they are coming here for a better financial life. The next question would be, why does Europe, and more so Britain specifically, have that issue, Alex? Why is it that when we look at Africa, we don't see loads of white people going over there, right, for economic opportunities? Well, we don't need to really discuss that. It's obvious, right? Because those opportunities are not there. Or they're not there in any kind of great comparison to Western countries, right? Employment, education, welfare, safety, security, legal rights, human rights, all of that stuff, right? It's because there was no need for those said countries and those parts of the world to first run with an ideology that welcomes this type of societal makeup. Number two, has an intrinsic link, still so till this very day, economic, military, otherwise, with these parts of the world. So naturally, people will see, well, heck, since our history is so aligned and we're so close, whether it's through colonialism, whether it's through existing economic agreements, political agreements, Commonwealth, whatever you want to name it, whatever schemes that are out there, it's an invitation. Now, one can see it as, one can argue the fact that, well, the war, destruction, economic destabilization of these said countries, Britain and its allies are to blame for it, therefore we have a right to go there. That's one argument. Second argument is, I'm a citizen of the world, I'll travel where I wish, where I think I can provide a better family, life for my family. that one's a bit harder to argue against any human being.
Yeah, the amount of people now who've gone to live in Dubai. For
Yeah,
example.
do you understand, right?
That's a kind of
for
reverse,
a better life, right?
Yeah, a reverse situation. That's where the white people are going.
And you know what? I'm not going to mention no names, but I heard some British white ethno-nationalists actually articulate this quite well. Is that if you're, the way I say, if you're Abdul or Vinod is being incentivized to come here for whatever reason, if I was in their position, I would go as well.
Yeah, well, why wouldn't you? Exactly.
Yeah? So there's so many layers to this, Alex, that we have to have a mature conversation about, right? Deport them. That's fine. Let's say we deport every single illegal immigrant that's Muslim in this country, in the United Kingdom. Let's say we got rid of everyone whose immigration status is either, on the fence, undecided. Let's say we deport every single one of my Muslim immigrant brothers, right? And a fellow brother in humanity for everyone else. You're still left with 4 million Muslims. Right?
Yeah.
Most of whom date their heritage back to at least one generation back, right? What do you do with them who have become increasingly more religious, increasingly more conservative, increasingly more identitarian?
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah.
What's
going on there?
9/11, 7/7, Afghanistan, Iraq, state Islamophobia, counter-terrorism laws, prevent, CVE.
But but these things exist for a reason. There was a terror attack at 9/11. I think I read some research on the way here that one of the most recent Muslim culture attitude surveys, that almost a half of Muslims in Britain think that 9/11 was a sort of US-Israeli plot.
There's many white folk that believe that now.
Oh, no, there's lots of people who do believe that in general. But, the thing is this, right? We know...
Do you acknowledge that those things that I mentioned?
Yeah.
Do we agree that those things existed?
Of course they existed.
The rights and wrongs of it aside, those things existed.
Well, arguably prevent exists because of some of the things you named beforehand.
Yeah.
But... the fact is, we do have a situation where there are people who live in this country of Muslim faith, and I say of Muslim faith in particular because I don't think this is the same with the Nigerian Christians who have come to live here, etc., or the Polish builders, or the Chinese who have their takeaway shops, or whatever. There are a cohort of people of the Muslim faith who live in this country who really don't like the West, who are becoming sort of more radical in their dislike and distaste. And increasingly, like you said, more religious, more conservative.
Do you think I hate Britain?
No, I don't think you do.
No, genuinely. Whatever little
pin you
research
down.
you've seen or tweet of mine, do you think I hate Britain? Because hate is a strong word, Alex.
So I'm not talking about you, because I don't get that impression about you at all.
Yeah.
But we know that there are people who do feel that way very clearly when it came to the formation of the Islamic State and lots of people going off to join ISIS. The vast majority of the foreign soldiers, not the vast majority, but the biggest cohorts came from the United Kingdom, which suggests to me we have a problem here. We have people in this country who don't like this country, who are deeply intolerant of cultures and religions that aren't their own. Not only have they not assimilated, they've not integrated, and not only that, they actively hate the country that they're in and the people of that country. And that, I'd say, is relatively unique to certain cohorts within the Muslim faith. Now, do I think that that's all Muslims? No, absolutely not. But we know we have this problem. We know there is an underbelly of people. We know there's around, 50,000 people on the terror watch list, and 75% of those are Muslims of the Muslim faith. We've seen terror attacks. We continue to see from Southport, and regularly now. We are continuing to see acts of violence.
Was the killer a Muslim? The Southport killer? We
can't talk about it, can we? Because
we
prejudice the case. But we know he has been arrested on separate terror charges.
But that's been unconfirmed. His religious identity or his motivation for that regard is unconfirmed.
And we can't talk about that because we'll prejudice the case.
Yeah.
But we can go back to whether it be Lee Rigby, 7/7, Ariana Grande concert, so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
We know we haven't had Christian terrorism. We haven't had Sikh terrorism. Okay,
like far right terrorism.
You've got far right entities without doubt. Think about they make up 75% of people on the watch list are Muslims, the far righters, because you've also got Sikh terrorism in this country as well, something that we don't talk about much. But we do know that there is an issue here. How do we? I mean, when it comes to the uprising against that school teacher in Batley for showing a picture of the Prophet Muhammad, we understand that that is disrespectful to Muslims. He was a young teacher. Did he want to create hurt and upset? I very much doubt it. The reaction to that was so vitriolic. That man is in hiding. That can't be right. It can't be right when there was footage of the two kids at Manchester Airport beating seven shades out of some police. Regardless of how the police reacted, they're the ones who are at the moment being investigated.
Or what took place beforehand.
But we don't know that even, do we, fully? But there was huge demonstrations, shouting outside police stations. We know that Mike Freer, the Conservative MP in Golders Green, had his constituency office set alight, death threats, David Amis murdered.
They weren't Muslim,
the amount of MPs who, as a result, especially of votes on ceasefires in Gaza, have to carry panic buttons and live in fear. I mean, we have a problem, and this is something that we somehow need to address. And my feeling is, when I say we need to address, I think we're not doing it. I think in the West we are very, very concerned and worried about upsetting Muslims and making life difficult for moderate integrated Muslims, but not treating this problem, I think, makes the situation worse for them. And doesn't the lead have to come from the Muslim community itself?
So there's a whole host of things you said there.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Let me try. And if I miss anything out, just highlight it to me, yeah? First and foremost, you said, look, there was loads of numbers of young Muslim men who went to join ISIS when they declared their false caliphate in 2014. I think the numbers was somewhere between 800 to 1,400. Now that's relative as to whether you think that's significant or not. But let me just explain something to you here. Most of those who went there and joined, their reasons varied. Some of them were ideologues. Some of them had been groomed. Some of them wanted to leave the disbelieving and hedonistic West to live in a utopian caliphate. Their reasons varied. The situation that we had in Syria, which gave birth to ISIS, Alex, was the US-led invasion of Iraq. Because ISIS was basically born out of Ba'athis in prison, to the extent which Obama apologized for that. He acknowledged that in an interview with Vice News. I'm trying to get you here because we said, how did we get here, right? You're going to present what you did and I'm going to try contextualize it, right? The rights and wrongs of it is for me and you to have a discussion about. The point I'm trying to say is young, disillusioned, quote unquote, even though I reject the application of it because the meaning's so skewed and politicized, extreme, groomed, radicals, whatever you want to call them. They went to this fake caliphate for various reasons, right? In a region which had been seriously destabilized by the US-led invasion. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, his background is Ba'athis. His background is the ideological affiliation of the Saddam regime, a war which was based on false premises. There was no WMDs, they weren't harboring Al-Qaeda, but ISIS was certainly born out of it, right? When 7/7 happened, Mohammed Sadiq, one of the main perpetrators of that horrific attack, in his video message, he specifically highlighted Afghanistan and Iraq. Baroness Manningham Buller, former head of MI5, warned the Blair administration repeatedly against the invasion of Iraq. Said that if you do this, at some point, some chickens are going to come home to roost. And we're going to have a domestic radicalization issue where you're going to anger Muslims, right? Who have this affinity with the rest of the Muslim world. In whatever spectrum or expression, Muslims have an affinity with their co-religionists around the world, more so than any other faith. That's just something is a reality, yeah? Obviously, we went into Iraq. There were no WMDs. There were no harboring of Al-Qaeda. It was regime change. We, at the behest of the United States, we lost Brits here who fought there, right? And what was achieved? Afghanistan, a country I've just came back from, and you quote tweeted one of our clips.
Right, because you're making it out to be like a Disneyland. I don't think women are having a good time, are they?
No, look at Afghanistan. 2001, we invaded. 2021, it's the Taliban back in power, right? They were doing diplomacy in Qatar and guerrilla warfare in the mountains. And the country was taken back by the very force. That's not even a proscribed terrorist organization in the UK or the US and trying to paint a picture, a wider picture of how we got to where we are, right? Now, naturally, as a result of these things that are happening in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places, it's naturally going to affect domestic issues. That's why we had 7/7. The perpetrators highlighted foreign policy. Michael Adebolajo, who carried out the attack against Lee Rigby, who killed him, before citing verses of the Quran, what did he say? You're doing this to our brothers and sisters in there, and there, so we're going to bring the terror to your streets. Again, a very explicit reference to things happening abroad. Now, the reason why people turn to criminality and this type of violence in the name of whatever it may be, it has to be studied case by case, Alex.
Of course.
But we can't deny that there are things that are happening abroad which are affecting or directly linked to domestic anti-terrorism policies in the country, and that's going to affect the community, which demographic has more closest links to things happening in the Muslim world. Do you get it?
Of course.
Now, domestic terrorism is not something Britain is new to. It's had the IRA threat. For crying out loud, the death toll from IRA attacks, surpasses that of domestic Muslim terrorism. Yeah, we had assassination attempts on Thatcher. Lord Mountbatten was killed. There were mortars heading towards Downing Street. There was no new policies that directly criminalised or singled out the Catholic community because the existing criminal framework was sufficient to deal with domestic terrorism. So my argument is on this issue of domestic terrorism and why is it happening in Dilly and why radicalising, hating Britain. It's not even necessarily hating Britain. It could be hating Britain's approach and policies in those said lands. That doesn't mean they hate British people or their British white neighbour or peer or colleague.
But when they perpetrate acts of terrorism against little girls at a concert,
absolutely horrific.
When this is taking place, look, I could turn around and say I am extremely distressed about how Christians are treated in northern Nigeria. In fact, how a lot of Christians have been treated across the Middle East for centuries, driven out. You look at Lebanon, you look at Syria, the Syrian Christians, you look at
But
Turkey.
they still exist there. They still exist there in the millions.
Very few. They're very
their
few.
churches are still there, Alex.
They're very, very few.
The Copts
They're
still
very
make up
few.
10 to
You look at
15% of Egypt.
The demographic, yeah. Well, in Egypt, but even in Egypt, the Christian community was about 5 times as big as it is now.
No one talks about the Christian community of Palestine and how they were.
That's true, actually.
Right.
There's but the thing is this, right? So Christians have been persecuted and treated dreadfully in the Middle East, but I don't find myself motivated to go and then attack somebody who is of Middle Eastern heritage or a Muslim, or it's that reaction is something that is oftentimes uniquely Islamist. I was going to say Islamic, which it isn't. Islamist.
How do you define Islamist?
Well, I think Islamism is the idea that, I mean, you'll be the better one to define it than I would, but you have people who are Islamic and of the Muslim faith, and then Islamism is the extremist element where they might cite the interpretations of the Quran to motivate them to want to fulfill whatever they believe their sort of, God-driven destiny is or their purpose.
Can I just add to that? Because this term Islamist, because it can be very relevant to our conversation, like you're literally about to start discussing this, right? An Islamist, first and foremost, or Islamism is a label which the Muslims themselves have not coined for themselves.
Right.
Rarely will you find in the works of Islamic literature or academia pre-colonialism that would say Islamist or Islamism. This term is a European term that's been coined by European thinkers, Orientalist thinkers and academics to describe those Muslims who believe that Islam should play more of a role in governance and public life. That is the definition of an Islamist. In that regard, Alex, many, many, many ordinary Muslims of so many different walks of life would fall into that category, right? I, as a Muslim, born here, of Bangladeshi heritage, I believe that in an ideal society, and we all have ideal societies, we all have utopias and ideal societies of what we think a good society would look like. You said you're a Christian. I'm sure you would prefer a British society which would be more at least influenced or inclined towards some biblical values of some sort. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd like it if more people went to church, that's for sure. And actually celebrated the religion.
Yes, so similarly, as a Muslim, I believe that a better society would be one that would be more adherent and aware and implemented of God's laws and values, right? Now, that term has now been coined to describe a whole host of a spectrum of Muslims, right? From those who I've just described here, that as Muslims, we don't believe our affair is just a secular affair. We don't limit God's, requirements just in the, in our home or in the mosque, right? It should have some positive impact in society. And no one needs to have a nightmare because no one's trying to do that really in Britain. I'll be honest with you. Against what people may believe. Remember that clip I showed you of yours when you were screwing about the Ramadan sign? This is not an attempt to Islamize society. The point here is, Alex, if one thing's not going to be allowed for Muslims, it has to not be allowed for every other faith.
But why is that? Because I don't think that's necessarily the case, because talking about that clip, this is a Christian country. It was Easter time. I would much rather see a celebration of Easter, which is a Christian, is probably the most important festival. Yes, Christmas is the big commercial one that everyone celebrates, where they believe in God, where they've got a Christian bone in their body. Easter's the big one. And I want to see this country protect the fact that it's a Christian country, that it has Judeo-Christian heritage, because our values, our democratic system, our cultural mores are all built upon so many centuries now of Christianity. And it isn't the case that all religions are treated equally in this country, I don't think. If anything, and this isn't the fault of the Muslim, by the way, if anything, Christianity by our establishment is swept away, it's minimised, it's attacked even. All too readily. You can't say
Islam
Happy
isn't
Christmas. Say, okay, no, we can get onto that actually. But on the other hand, the most that Diwali gets is a thing in Trafalgar Square, where there's a bit of a sort of a Bhangra Bollywood stage and some singing. Leicester maybe a bit more. But it seemed deeply inappropriate to me over Easter for Ramadan lights to have been put all down Regent Street and messages in the Quran put up in the train stations, because this isn't happening from, from the Bhagavad Gita. You're not getting bits from the Torah put up. And it does seem to me like there is an almost willful exercise to over-promote Islam. And I'm uncomfortable with that. Because
why do you think that's happening?
I don't know. Why? I don't
know. No, I'm asking you,
why
do you think that's happening?
Well, listen, I think
By the way, I disagree with you, but I want to know why you think that there is this kind of pandering to Muslims. Okay, but when I'm completely on the other side, thinking that we are the most attacked, we are statistically the most targeted in terms of a hate crimes point of view. So I'm now wondering, and if you accept that all those other things do happen, albeit in a much smaller scale for Hindus and Sikhs and so forth, the point is, when you see it expressed by Muslims for Islamic dates and so forth, the two Eids and Ramadan, really that's what it is, the two Eids and Ramadan, there could be demographic reasons for that. There could be local authority influences by that.
For sure.
But I'm of the position, this is what I am of the position, that either everyone's allowed to do it or no one's allowed to do it.
But it's a Christian country, so
actually... But then speak to the Christian authorities about that.
But then that wouldn't be the case in a Muslim country. You wouldn't go and be able to have, your Jesuses and then
but they didn't claim to
be...
They don't claim to be a secular liberal democracy that facilitates and legally allows these things, Alex.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm with you.
So why criticize any Muslim majority country, or any country for that matter, for not allowing X, Y, and Z, when if that's not what they claim to be abiding by?
Yeah, no, look, I said it's not the fault of the Muslims
when
it comes to this. Although I would say, so it's the fault, in part it's the fault of, I'd say, a couple of things. One is it's a sort of trend amongst the liberal elites, like I said, to spit down, kick down on Christianity and kick down on our heritage. It's a sort of almost a cultural neo-Marxist, middle-class white attitude, which I hate. Really am not for it at all. I think it's very destructive. But also I think that it's fair to say that elements of Islam are far more of a sort of campaigning, crusading religion than Sikhism, than Hinduism. I think there's a far more, for want of a better phrase, evangelizing element about Islam, wanting to actually politically go out and influence change.
These are some big bombs you're dropping, Alex.
Yeah, no, but do you think, because most Hindus just get on with getting
Are you saying that with Modi in power, with the Hindutva regime right now, that's carrying out ridiculous levels of pogroms and anti-discrimination laws against Muslims and Christians and Dalits and women, there's extreme elements that you describe that are far more popularized and normalized in other parts of the world, Alex, right? So just to get to that point there, sometimes when I see certain Muslim events, just want to also say this, right? There is a violent, militant variation of Hinduism, and it's very much present in India right now, and even in my motherland of Bangladesh. As you mentioned earlier, there is a terrorist element of Sikhism. I think you're referring to the Khalistan movement, right?
Yeah.
Again, I have a different perspective to those from that organization. What I'm trying to say is that when I see certain events taking place where Eid or Ramadan is flexed a bit too much, I find it a bit cringe and disproportionate, and I'd prefer if it wasn't the case. I'd prefer if in public spaces Muslims weren't so easily offended by certain things, right? And I'm saying this to you as someone who is labeled as a textbook Islamist, right? Or a textbook whatever. I'm telling you that there's certain expressions of our, religious festivals or whatever it may be, that even I find a bit unnecessary, cringe, and can be provocative to those who already have, opinions about Islam or Muslims, yeah? But then I think to myself, the same reason in which, or the legal basis in which Muslims do these things, whether halal meat requirements, similar to kosher requirements, circumcision requirements in the NHS, similar to the Jewish community, eating, restrictions or habits or requirements. The thing is, Alex, you can only really criticize that from the basis of what the United Kingdom and other Western countries themselves allow and invite to.
Right, no, I agree.
Do you understand, Alex?
Yeah.
So we can discuss till the cows come home about why is there lights here and not lights there, and the Christians get bashed and all this kind of stuff. But the point is, we have to discuss it from at least a legal point of view, which is, are Muslims going above and beyond what is legally allowed for them, and thereby they'd be breaking a law.
Yeah.
For example, one of the things that really triggers patriots is when they say Muslims praying in public. And they say, hey, this is a flex of strength, and this is them trying to show that, they're powerful and strong with their Allahu Akbars in public. You're absolutely correct. Where there's a mosque to pray, go pray in that mosque.
Yeah.
But Muslims are of the belief, whether you're in Kathmandu or in Somaliland or in London or New York, if prayer is due and it's short, God has made the whole earth somewhere you can pray. It's not to show or force anything. Other nuances would be that the person could be traveling. There's more likely than not, there's an event happening. That's what it usually is. It's usually at protests and events like that. It's no show of strength. What I want to know from you and explore with you is that why do Christians get so insecure and project on Muslims about their own spiritual commitment and connection to Christianity? Why is it that everyone becomes a Christian? And I see this on X a lot. Obviously the algorithms could be, exposing it more than I really should. We all know that our algorithms on X, it's all tailored towards the kind of things that we want to look into and engage with, right? Why project Muslims, wherever you put us, we're going to do three things, Alex. And I've always said this to those from the right, and those who have issues to do with, demographic replacement, birth rates and all this kind of stuff. I say, look, you can put a Muslim in the Arctic, you can put them in London, you can put them at the bottom of Chile, yeah? Wherever you put them. We're going to marry, we're going to have children, and we're going to try to practice our faith. That doesn't change where we are. Now, there are some Muslim countries, Alex, where I am more free being a Muslim in the United Kingdom than those countries. Despotic regimes, Muslim majority, may even have Islam mentioned in their constitution. But there are some aspects of my faith that I can practice more freely here, and there's other aspects which I can practice more freely there. And so I think my message to patriots would be that when you see Muslims getting married, having children, and all these conversations about birth rates and, white replacement, all this kind of stuff, I don't want to delve into this stuff because social media flags that stuff straight away quickly when you talk about replacement theory and all that kind of stuff, right? Muslims don't be like, oh, we're in Britain, we're going to outbreed the whites and we're going to make this a Sharia Islamic state and a black flag's going to be waving from Downing Street. I swear to you, Alex, there is no such plot that I'm aware of, and I've been in this circuit, in this network of activism, journalism, and other faith-based work, post 9/11, post 7/7, post Woolwich. I've been involved with pretty much different groups who would certainly be more towards a kind of Islamically inclined, quote unquote, Islamist, whatever you want to call it. There is no such plot. Ultimate story of Muslims that I believe, right? And again, I don't want to speak on behalf of all 4 million. And I'm going to try to be as honest as possible, Alex. Hating Britain is something very strong, because hate would entail that you would do something to then harm this country. Having very critical views grounded on your faith, your history, your culture is something we have to accept exists and will exist, not just with Muslims, but with people of colour. Yeah, whether they're from the West Indies or certain parts of Africa, they're going to have certain attitudes and views about their country of birth, right? For whatever reason, we can't prevent that. For Muslims, it's very much heightened because of things that are happening in the Middle East and the Muslim majority world in terms of wars, invasions, oppression, occupation, all that kind of stuff. But I truly believe most Muslims in the United Kingdom just want to practice their faith, survive, thrive, contribute where they can, emulate their faith-based values in different ways by friendships, conversations, open invitation, proselytization. It varies. There is no plot to take over the United Kingdom. It doesn't even make sense. A most Muslim wouldn't even want it. As a Muslim who believes in Sharia law and believes that this is truly divine God's laws, every bit of it, and it has its own appropriate implementation as time goes, but it's there and here forever. I'm telling you, Alex, there is no plot to make Britain some Islamic state. Are Muslims having more children than their white counterparts? Absolutely. But we are also seeing a drop. I remember when we were exchanging voice notes and I sent you that letter to the Patriots. I spoke about it. There are certain social trends that are affecting the white indigenous majority, that are affecting the Muslim community. People are getting married later. They're getting married less. They're having less children and so forth. Similar trends that are happening, and that's inevitable. But why are Muslims having more children than their white counterparts? It's because they often get married more, and those marriages tend to last longer. And the critics would say, hey, that's because the guys go and you guys survive on benefits and we're providing. Oh, okay, fair enough. I would then counter that if anyone meets the threshold under the law of this country to apply for benefits, that's their right. If you want to go into the demographics and race and religious of those who lean on that system, that's a completely different conversation. But if generally within the Muslim community, there's just a higher percentage of women that tend to stay home or not so committed to careers after a particular point in their life. Remember I told you I've got 3 educated sisters, 2 of them are graduates, 2 of them are working professionals, my wife is a graduate. I come from a family of educated Muslim women, but very devout Muslim women, all who came to their religious journey at different points in their life. We just want to live, survive, be safe, secure. We're no different to anyone else. We want to go out there, work, have some savings, live a good life, try to be as pleasing to God in our private and public affairs as much as possible. And where there are opportunities for our faith community to do things within the law, which is there for every faith community to do if they wish to do so. Like we see with the Jewish community in certain parts of London and Manchester. Just like we see with certain Sikh communities within the Midlands and Southall and other areas. We see it. It is now not the fault of the Muslims that we are more outwardly more outwardly expressive. Or where there's a legal opportunity open to all faith communities, that Muslims wouldn't utilize that.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
I agree with you, and it's interesting. You said at the start of your answer, why is it that Christians seem to be so sensitive about this? It's and you sort of hinting to the fact that when you look at sort of the algorithm-driven stuff online, there's now this sort of trend of the right wing to suddenly go, Christianity, because you're right. I mean, I think, frankly speaking, the Western world, in particular, I would say, the Anglosphere, have thought that they could get rid of all of this stuff, all the God nonsense. We don't need that anymore. We can put that in the bin, replace it with all these neo-religions of, trans rights and gender fluidity and, you name it. And it's having a hugely deleterious effect on birth rates, on societal confidence.
What's your views on the Victorian period?
Well,
So-
I wasn't there during the time.
But generally, what
Yeah,
you
do
know of it,
it's-
what you read of it, what you're aware of it.
It's
what's the-
interesting because, I mean, my take on the Victorian period, and I'm no expert, is it was a sort of huge snapback after a period of quite licentiousness, permissiveness. It was a huge sort of almost an overcorrection into deep sort of, conservatism. And there were pockets of, awful things and prostitution and all sorts of dreadful things going on. There was a sort of huge grimy underbelly.
I ask because that's regarded as the last kind of Christian golden era of Britain. Some regard the Victorian period as such.
Perhaps you're right. And it's strange, it's sort of one of the heights of empire as
Yeah.
well. But we have done
Yeah.
something in the West, particularly the Anglosphere. You don't see it as much in the southern Mediterranean countries, the Catholic countries. But the sort of Protestant countries in particular have just gone, we don't need God. And I'm like, and then they complain when someone else comes along and says, well, we do need God and we're going to be quite assertive about it. So I agree with those points entirely. And the things that you're talking about in terms of the huge demographic changes, again, Muslim families tend to have a higher birth rate than non-Muslim
Not
families.
as high as it once was.
Yeah,
So
right.
I think the white British birth rate is between 1.2 to 1.4.
Right.
And I think the Muslim is 1.9 to 2.2.
Right.
Pre-2001, so it goes back, I think it's 2021, 11, 2001, I think the birth rate for British Muslims, even though we're far few in number, was somewhere between 3.6 to 3.9.
Wow.
Right? So we've seen a drop as well.
Yeah.
Right? And that's as a result of integration.
Integration, right,
Huh?
interesting,
So how
yeah.
can you say we have not, if we still had a birth rate of that of my mother, 5, 6, and my grandmother's, then there could be an argument that, hey, listen, these lot are living completely sheltered lives, more so like the Mormons, where literally they've got their own way happening. No, the very fact that these social trends are affecting, by the way, I don't think that's a good thing. Let me just make that very clear as well. I don't think that's a good, I am anti-assimilationist. But I accept that integration has already taken place and assimilation will happen whether I like it or not. Because as long as you are a minority faith, minority community, the stronger, more demographic majority, all the melting pot of options and the marketplace of ideas, you're going to assimilate or subscribe to views and values that were not of your grandparents.
So where do we find ourselves, right, in, say, 40, 50 years' time? Probably after I've shuffled off my mortal coil, so I won't get to see what happens.
Are you going to go Dubai?
But yeah, yeah. No, but where do we see ourselves in terms of? I mean, so Anglo-Saxons have become like the giant panda. They're not breeding. They're destroying their own culture. They're letting go of their own heritage. I mean,
Why?
It's interesting. I don't know. I think there's actually we're on the cusp of something reversing in this regard.
Do you think cultural Marxism is more closer to Islam or whatever worldview you subscribe to? What do you think?
That's an interesting one because there are elements, and I don't know Islam brilliantly. Why would I? But there's elements of socialism, let's say, organisations, structures, and all the rest of it, which I think are more closely tied to organised religion. Full stop. Whether you're talking about Islam or Christianity, there's elements of that that's more closely tied. Yet cultural Marxism largely seeks to destroy religions. It doesn't want religions there. It kind of wants to erase all of that.
But its roots is Western, is it not? Its roots is European.
Would the Russians call themselves Western? I don't think
European,
so.
They're part of that
They're
tradition.
part of, but they're definitely not
Socialism.
Western.
Okay, but what I'm trying to say is that socialism, communism, secularism, all these isms, which we can lay blame to for the erosion of God-centric values, at least of the Abrahamic tradition, right, can be rooted back to, Alex, is the Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment. Those ideas became normalized in certain parts of Europe, that Anglosphere. That's what you mentioned, Germany, Britain. Those ideas and those ideologies which we are seeing the kind of problems of now, they're not from the Islamic tradition.
No.
They're not from Islamic civilization.
No, exactly. No, this is what I was saying. Essentially,
far closer
Anglo-Saxons have done this to themselves.
Yeah.
That I understand. But there's a growing sort of alarmism of, oh my goodness, what have we done? And like I said, let's play it forward sort of 50 years or so. looking at the different birth rates and assuming that your 3 children themselves have gone on to have had 3 children each, and, you know, saying that the average Muslim family, meanwhile, in the Anglo-Saxon community, we're still like falling off the edge of a cliff, then we really are looking at a very different demographic composition of Britain. How is that going to manifest? What is that going to look like? What would you have? What would your hopes be for
I don't
how
know,
that
Alex.
looks?
I don't know how it looked, and nor do I necessarily think that there is going to be this huge. I know there's Pew Research and other reputable, guys who do polls, right? And even I think Nigel Farage recently mentioned that. Look, if we don't, he said something very recently in a recent podcast. He said, if we alienate most of Islam by 2030 or 2050, we've lost. I don't know what he meant by that, but that's what he said. In a recent podcast, a clip went viral. He said, if we alienate the whole of Islam, we would have lost. We'd have lost. And I'm not sure if he said 2030 or 2050.
Like, in terms of you're going to have people living amongst you who really don't like you and they're going to be a more dominant force.
That,
one assumes that's what he might have been suggesting.
That and or that we will be a demographic minority in our own native motherlands. Either or, whatever he meant from that, yeah? First and foremost, I'm always a believer of the quality, and Muslims generally, and God himself, he's more of a believer of the quality of believers, Alex, not the quantity of believers. Even though the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, told Muslims to marry, have children, so he could be proud of his nation's numbers on the Day of Judgment. That's a clear prophetic instruction from the man whom we deem as the final messenger, to tell us to get married, have children. In fact, getting married increases the blessedness of your financial situation. These are all prophetic statements. Never did the Prophet say, but that only applies in Europe, or in the land of the Romans, or in Britannica. Yeah. Prophet Muhammad didn't say that, Alex. He generally said 1400 years ago to the Muslims, get married, have children. Because this is the essence of life.
As it says in the Bible.
It's the essence of life. This is the essence of being, right? It's one of the 3 innate beliefs that we have. It's the belief to procreate. How you do it, how it happens, under what moral justification, that's different. But we all human beings want to procreate, right?
It's interesting because it's very much the same in the Bible. In fact, the overlaps of
course there'd be overlaps
as two Abrahamic religions are fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think you guys came and nicked our stuff.
Nah, not at all, not at all. You guys were outdated. You need an update. You need a revival. By the way, Muslims believe, just so for your viewers who are Christian, just so you know, this is a learning process for you as well. Muslims believe that those Christians who did not receive the message of Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, and were sincere and genuine followers of Prophet Jesus, are Muslims, are believers. Muslims believe that all the followers of all the prophets, the biblical prophets from Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Jesus, John, Prophet Muhammad being the final messenger, that their followers were all Muslims, were all believers, were all going to be all inhabitants of paradise. The fine line comes after the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, upon be peace. If as a Christian you've received that message, that's a bit different now. You are a Christian, right? According to your belief, irrespective of which denomination you subscribe to, because I reject Jesus being God, I'm going to the hellfire. Has that stopped me from being courteous and respectful and honourable and chivalrous to you?
No, not at all.
And I will. So the point I'm trying to make is that people are like, oh, well, you hate us because in this Quranic passage, God says this about the disbelievers and says this about the Christians and says this about the Jews and this about the polytheists. Yeah, God does from the standpoint of the belief, not necessarily how you treat and engage with them. So I just want to kind of get over this whole point about hating Britain, trying to outbreed the white folk. And back to your question, what do I think it's going to look like in 2030 or 2050? I don't know, Alex. I don't even know whether the quality of Muslims, how Muslim will they remain? Or will they be as you want them to be, more or fully assimilated? Some would argue that if Muslims are in a strong demographic percentage, 20, 25, 30, 35% by 2050, what is going to be the essence of their faith? Are they going to be fully assimilationists, like how Alex wants? Or will they hold on to their Islamic values and identity more so they feel from their standpoint of faith that they can rescue their Roman brethren?
What we have seen, interestingly, though, is largely with every passing generation, there being a higher level of religiosity, a higher level of identifying.
Yeah, explain that. 9/11, war on terror. When you see Muslims in the news constantly, there was a gentleman I'd like everyone to look into on both camps. Professor Paul Baker from the University of Lancaster carried out a fascinating piece of research, Alex. From the period of 2006 to 2013, he studied more than 200,000 news articles from the British press concerning Islam or Muslims. That's a massive pool of data and stuff to go through. Professor Paul Baker, University of Lancaster. He found that the ratio to positive to negative articles in the British press was 1 to 21. Right. 21 negative articles about Islam or Muslims to 1 positive one. When you're growing up in that, and I grew up in that, when 9/11 happened, I was in year 9. When 7/7 happened, I was in year 12, lower sixth form. When Iraq happened, I grew up in the 9/11 era, right? Where you and your religion are kind of looked at as a suspect community, as a hostile community, as a community that ultimately could just click a bomb at any time, where you have some kind of affinity to violence and hatred towards this country. And that's usually skewed by or mistaken for critical positions about how damaging British foreign policy is in the Muslim world. For some reason that, and as well as having an affinity with your co-religionists in other parts of the Muslim world, is seen as nearly treacherous. That how could second and third generation Muslims, you freaking lot should have been more assimilated than your forefathers, like every other community has. Correct, Alex?
Yeah.
If you look at every other community, their second and third generations, besides the shade of their tone of their skin color, they have lots of overlaps and similarities to the white indigenous folk. Agreed? Right?
Yeah.
You'll find Muslims there as well, but not in those numbers, right? Well, that's because we've had 20 years of media coverage, politicians, successive governments, Labour, Conservatives, that have bashed Muslims and Islam as part of their dog whistle for political clout and points next to election time. Now, let me just finish up here and I'm going to hand it over to you. Is that if that is the environment in which Muslims are growing up in, right, whether you agree with that, that's how I've presented it to you or not, but those things happened, at least for those who have lived through that time, saw it, naturally it's going to have some influence in the way they perceive themselves, their belonging, how they see their relationship with the country of their birth and so forth. That's all I'm presenting, Alex.
But we know we have some issues when it comes to certain elements of certain Muslim communities. We can talk about the Grooming gang scandal, that's horrific. Horrific.
Absolutely.
As well as talking about, various terrorist attacks. Yes, I can understand when people say this is about UK foreign policy. To me, that still doesn't condone or make right that, someone's beheaded a soldier or blown up kids in a
but it's an important context.
Hall.
When you have the former head of MI5 telling Blair that this is going to happen and it happens, Alex, that's something that we should take a note of.
I am not a fan of Tony Blair, okay? I'm certainly not a fan of Alistair Campbell.
Or like when the Manchester Arena attacker bomber was already known to the security services, and his brother had gone to Libya. Why is the Muslim community to blame for shortcomings and failures from the security services? Number two, why are the Muslim community to blame for certain elements within the said community espousing views about British foreign policy? I don't understand why the Muslim community is collectively
I don't think anyone is collectively blaming the Muslim community. I think, in fact, there are great pains taken and huge sensitivities in trying to not do that. The minute there is a sort of atrocity, the language is always, Islam's the religion of peace. This is it is always said, the vast majority of Muslims are law-abiding, peaceful citizens who love this country.
Do you think we are?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, the empirical evidence stacks that up, because if 4 million of you were all...
I'm glad we're here.
If 4 million of you were all terrorists...
Thank you, Alex.
We'd be in trouble by now.
Do you know why that's such a good achievement between this conversation alone? Because there's so many on so many social media platforms, primarily X, right, that don't believe that the 4 million British Muslims, right? And by the way, there's a whole conversation about what does British mean? Are you British? Is it just citizenship? Is it just a piece of... That's a completely different conversation, and this conversation should be had about that. But I'm glad that you acknowledge that 60, 70 years on, the vast majority of Muslims, whether they hate British foreign policy, whether they dislike certain Western values or lifestyles, whatever it is, generally, mostly, if not in, no, I can't say entirely, of course not, because every community has criminal elements. They have been law-abiding.
Yeah, of course.
I believe they have integrated. You believe they've not assimilated enough or at all. But the point is, if a significant minority of British Muslims had a genuine gravitation towards violence, I swear to you, we'd have a civil war at our hands.
Oh no, we'd be in trouble. Yeah, this is what I'm saying.
Alex, we'd have a civil war at our hands.
Yeah.
So
no,
when we say that,
and
another thing, you know, this whole thing about, oh, Islam is peace, peace, peace. Do you know what the actual meaning is? Islam is submission to God, and the one who submits to God attains peace. That's what Islam means. Islam equals peace doesn't do you any favors when Alex can pick up a copy of the Quran and go to certain verses where God's talking about warfare, right? Or how to engage in battle, right? With your foes. So there's no point in saying Islam is peace. Yes, the one who follows Islam attains peace through submitting to God.
We do know that there are some extremely horrific elements to certain community. You know, we're talking about grooming guys. It's very difficult finding the language here, but should
we talk about the grooming gang?
Let's talk about that, because this is the thing. It's things like that when when you've got terrorist attacks, when you've got grooming gangs, these are the things that are clearly going to be sticking in a lot of people's minds. Now, I think most people are very aware that the vast majority of Muslims are not those people. I think, we know that.
Now, on this issue of grooming gangs, let's make it abundantly and unequivocally clear that those who engage in those types of crimes are heinous criminals, utterly shameful, the most disgusting types of human beings to have those types of thoughts and beliefs. To carry out in such a systemic way the abuse of vulnerable children, white, black or brown, Muslim or non-Muslim. I will take, this is my personal position by the way, I will take responsibility, and I would encourage Muslim communities up and down the UK to talk about this more and take collective ownership if the perpetrators cited Islamic reasonings for what they did. From my recollection, from my research, not a single perpetrator, Rotherham, Rochdale, all the other towns and cities that had disproportionate numbers of sexual groomers that were South Asian, Pakistani or Muslim. None of them cited the marriage of Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, with Aisha. None of them cited that. None of them in their private or public recordings or anything that they did said that, oh, because the Prophet Muhammad did this, we're going out and doing this. We are targeting these white vulnerable girls because the Prophet said so. They never presented these arguments in their justifications. These were criminals and sexual perverts and people who had a kind of depraved approach to these desires. Remember when we spoke about earlier, procreation instinct is one of the things which are innate to human beings. How you do it, how it manifests is up to your moral compass. For these guys who identified as Muslim, who still probably regard themselves as Muslims, they committed a major sin for which there will be accountability in the hereafter. And no amount of jail time in HMP Belmarsh or sending them back to Pakistan is going to come remotely close to the punishment of the hereafter for any crime or sin committed by anyone. And that's me being serious, Alex. Had there been these perpetrators cited religious motivation or justification, I would truly understand. Right? What these guys did were criminal. They should have faced and should continue to face the full force of the law. But again, I want to present this to you. Why is it a Muslim problem? Why is it something which is collectively applied to the Muslim community as opposed to social services and local authority or police tiptoeing around certain sensitivities in their respective towns and cities? That's not to do with it being a Muslim problem. That's to do with how they approach this situation with so many kind of blind spots. Why did you have to be so sensitive about this issue about racial sensitivity or being labelled X, Y, and Z? If a crime has taken place, investigate that crime and bring those who committed it to justice, right? I'm a believer of that. I'm a believer that if there's certain sensitivities around certain communities and that prevents you from preventing crime, right? That's absurd. So we're on the same page. What I'm questioning here, though, is this. Why is it collectively a Muslim or Islamic issue when there's no justification, when there's no motivation that's been explicitly recorded or said by the perpetrators that links it to a religiously motivated crime?
Well, back at you then. Why has it been largely within that community? Why have the vast number of grooming gangs, the perpetrators of child sexual grooming,
they are mostly white.
Rape,
do we accept that?
Yeah. In the context of the grooming gangs, yes, vast majority.
Okay, but
I think it's 85%.
But
of the perpetrators.
But the Home Office reported, I think, just 4 years ago, that the vast majority of child sexual crimes are predominantly white men.
You'd expect in a country where you still got a majority white community for the vast majority of paedophilia.
So we're now going to per capita, right?
And I don't think, and by the way, I don't think paedophilia is a sort of, no religion or culture or race has a monopoly on paedophilia.
There was a conference in Germany just a couple of months ago where they were talking about including it into one of the sexual persuasions. Academics,
oh gosh, I know,
I swear to you, academics in Germany, right, and there were other Europeans, and it was a massive conference, and we were just casually talking about how
the
that
map stuff, the minor attractive
crazy.
person is disgusting.
But back to it. So,
but is there, let's say, in some elements of some Muslim communities, when it comes to teaching about women, and the value of women and the worth of women, is there a connection between how some of these men might have been brought up to regard women, and particularly white women, and particularly, let's say, the white working class women who, were girls, little girls really, but they're, with all their makeup on and getting drunk and, sort of sexually maturing much earlier and, being promiscuous, let's say.
And some of them did come from broken
homes and all the rest
families,
of it. Is there an element here that's culturally, we're not talking about what's necessarily being taught, but I'd be interested to speak about that as well. But culturally, there is a lower regard when it comes to talking about how one is able, what they're allowed to do with these women.
No, I'll have to disagree with that, because the role and the position and the status of woman or women is very, very central and very, very focal to the Islamic faith, and I'll tell you how. God dedicates an entire chapter to the women. Some of the most celebrated and beloved women within the Islamic tradition is Mary, or the wife of Pharaoh, who took in Moses when he was a baby, or the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, Khadija. We are told since we are young that heaven lies at the feet of your mother. We are told that when a companion asked the Prophet Muhammad, who is most beloved to me, my mother or my father? The Prophet Muhammad said, mother. Then he said, mother again. Then he said, mother again. And then he said, the father. So the sanctity, the status of women is central to Islam, to the extent, and funnily enough, when I've said this to others who are from the right, once they did their research, they found out it was true. 1400 years ago, the Prophet Muhammad upon whom be peace took bay'ah from women. This was an act of political emancipation. This is women giving the Pledge of Allegiance from tribes to the Prophet Muhammad upon whom be peace, and later caliphs. Property rights, inheritance rights, roles in local authorities at that pre-modern era. Those bases, those laws, those frameworks, those opportunities were there. For sure, without a shadow of a doubt, Islam is a patriarchal religion. There is no doubt that there is an acknowledgement and an instruction that men are the gatekeepers of their families, their women folk, and generally things in society. There is no denying in that. I would be misrepresenting my faith if I said that, oh no, we're totally kind of on equality and we're a feminist religion. We are told to love our mothers, love our sisters, love our women folk, to respect them and honor them. Now, if that's now going to be looked at how that applies culturally in different parts of the Muslim majority world, and certain practices that are un-Islamic or regressive or unjust or oppressive, we have to make it clear, is this an Islamic belief or is this some kind of cultural practice that they have? So if you have any in mind, feel free to ask me. Then I can say to you if something is Islamic,
right,
and try to give you an explanation, or say I'll get back to you if I don't know, or something which is un-Islamic but is culturally present in certain societies. Tell me.
Let's talk about that then, because let's talk about a favourite sort of phrase of the woke left, lived experience, which I hate that phrase. But my lived experience, let's say, I've been living in London for over a decade now, and things have changed in that time, and I've moved in different parts of London. When I lived in Westminster 10 years ago, I lived there for 3 years, I just walked around by myself at night all the time. It's a very white area, Westminster, especially as a residential area. It's a very sort of Anglo-Saxon British area. You don't have sort of, big immigrant communities. You don't, but other parts of London, that's a very different demographic. And I've found that the way I am reacted to, the way I'm treated is very different. I draw attention. If I were to walk in certain parts of London, long blonde hair, no hijab on or anything like that, there's unwanted attention. There's, sort of, there's a hissing, there's a catcalling, there's staring, there's following, sometimes there's comments. I've just come back not too long ago from Morocco, one of my favourite countries on earth. Love the lamp.
Thanks.
Not going to say that's from Morocco, but
it's that flex, that vibe.
But I love Morocco. It's one of my favourite countries on earth, and the wonderful.
Sounds like Morocco loves you as well with the stories you're about to tell me.
Well, no, well, yeah, no. I've got examples of having had amazing hospitality in Morocco. There's once I went to climb in the Atlas Mountains with a good mountaineer friend of mine, and we were looking for somewhere to eat before we were going down to Imlil. It was Ramadan, everyone was breaking their fast, and all the restaurants are shut. And we just got invited into this one restaurant who were having a sort of staff party. And they're just like, come sit, just, have it. It's just beautiful. And they were singing these songs, and we didn't know what on earth anyone was going on about. Very few people spoke English, and we certainly didn't speak Arabic. But it was just wonderful. I've had amazing experiences there. But this last time I went with my other half. We're walking around the souks. As long as we were walking together, and this is what I found out in Marrakesh, the one time I went with my female friend who's the same age as me and doesn't look too dissimilar to me, it was a totally different life experience than the times I've been with, say, my mother as an older woman, or with a male companion. And we're walking through the souks, and most of the time we're sort of right by each other, holding hands, because, you get lost easily in there. It's very crowded. We just got separated for all of a minute, not even a minute, 30 seconds, just crowd of people got between us, and we were sort of, and I was physically attacked. I was groped, like whoosh, hands straight between the legs. And I find it as well, walking around, if it wasn't visible that he was near me, it'd be like, oh, gazelle, beautiful, come here. How many camels do your father want? Whatever, But just, but a very sort of, it's a very different thing to the builder's van whistle. Have you experienced it anywhere else outside of Morocco? That sort of harassment. Well, I've done work in Pakistan. But I wasn't even allowed out. So I didn't. If you don't go out, you don't get harassed. If you don't get harassed, right? But no, I was over work in Pakistan, so that it would have just been very sort of unseemly if I decided to leave. Have you experienced what you just described in Morocco? I've in London, yeah. Okay. I've experienced. You've been groped in London. I have been not physically, but I've been followed down the street. And did you know they were Muslim? All the way to my. This guy, very, very much assume he was, because he had the Afghan kolpol hat. It's called a kolpol hat. Okay. And looked Afghan, right? Unless he's sort of a very Afghan-looking, again, Afghanistan, lots of different tribes, but a very sort of Middle Eastern-looking man wearing a kolpol hat, who just happened to be a British man in fancy dress. I don't think so, because he was following me, and he was also chuntering away in a language that wasn't British, and he really sort of, English, followed me very close quarters. I was on the phone feeling, it's the middle of the day, feeling really intimidated, Kept following.
Did you get annoyed did you get annoyed when you hear different languages in Britain?
No, I don't think I do.
Is it all blah, 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 blah?
Well, I don't know. I can't really imitate whatever language he was speaking. Blah, blah, blah. I'd say blah, blah, blah about, whatever, other than French, which is a language I can speak. But followed me all the way to my front door, looked around outside. I had to go into my next door neighbour's house and hide them, who are Turkish, by the way. I love my neighbours. They're young son.
Big up to your neighbours.
Yeah, they're brilliant. Love them.
What was it? You were assuming you were being followed by one Muslim into the shelter of another Muslim.
Exactly.
Huh?
Although I don't think they're practising Muslims, though.
Practising or not, they're still Muslim.
But no, it was their young son. They weren't home. They're teenage boys. Sort of.
So should we address this kind of perception of reality?
But there's been lots of that. It's not an isolated incident, and you're finding more and more young girls that I speak to. One of my best mates who lives 2 streets down. She's a mother of 4 teenage daughters. She's got long blonde hair like me, and she said one day she went to pick up her daughter in school, and she was wearing what she would call mum shorts. She's not exactly wearing Kylie Minogue hot pants, but mum shorts. And some 2 Arabic guys came, so, "How are you wearing?" Sort of shouting at her, and this does happen. This is happening. Okay, let me. We're not making this up.
No. Let me address some of these points again. I like it because when you frame, you give me a couple of things to address.
Right.
And if I do miss anything out, Alex, just highlight it. Now, what you've experienced in Morocco and the things that you've just described, these things are sinful. These things are haram, meaning they're prohibited. You can't call to another woman. You can't hiss at another woman. You can't touch another woman. Yeah? When we met each other, we did not shake each other's hands, but I've honoured you and I've been as chivalrous as I can in our engagement right up until this point and hopefully after this point, right? So even if 10,000 men did this in every market, in every Muslim country, that makes their act wrong and sinful, but we must understand, or at least try to understand why.
Why? Yeah. Why?
Not that there's any data. There isn't data. Do we accept that? There is no data to say that X amount of people were surveyed in this country and therefore this is the conclusion. We haven't got that.
We don't have any sort of statistics like that in the UK.
Not in the UK or anywhere else as far as I'm aware. But if you do, please tell me.
There's lots of statistics on sexual harassment and rape and nationality from other countries.
Sure, but if we're looking at what you've described and what you said that other white women are experiencing from men that they believe are either Muslim or Middle Eastern or part of that neck of the world, yeah?
Yeah. From MENA countries.
MENA countries. Could even be South Asia as well, right? Just put the whole kind of non-white, most likely Muslim demographic into it, yeah? First, we have to ascertain how often and how real of a problem this is. We can only have such a discussion based on data and stats. We don't have that. But I'm going to believe you, and I will believe the testimonies of those who say that they've experienced this. And again, forgive my candidness. We're having a frank conversation, and this is about us and those who kind of subscribe to our views and values to understand one another better. You said earlier that when some white girls in these working class towns, when they're sexually maturing at a much earlier age, right? I'm going to ask you a frank question. Please be honest with me like you have been so far. Do you think white women, white European women, right? I don't like these labels, but I'm just going to say it because, and you can help me, correct me. Say to me, did you know, say it like this. In the same way that when you said Islamist, I want to correct or define that. So if I feel like I'm misrepresenting or mislabeling or miscategorizing, you tell me, yeah?
Yeah.
Would you say that white Western women are seen as more sexually active and promiscuous than, let's say, Muslim or Eastern women?
Without that, look, it's a very important point because this is something else I think is very dangerous in our society. And again, weirdly, I was thinking earlier when you were talking...
Marketing, Hollywood, popular culture, social media.
Porn,
everything.
The Kardashians, you name it.
So what's happened is, I swear by God, I am not excusing away any acts of criminality or un-Islamic haram acts. I swear to you, Alex, I'm not. But we would be ignorant to not understand why certain perceptions exist.
Right.
Why would this person think that it's appropriate to hiss or whistle at this woman and not this woman?
Right.
Or the probability of, if you were to put a guy in a room, white, non-white, Muslim, non-Muslim, say, right, here's a woman in a jilbab, in a burqa, right, or whatever, a headscarf, modestly loose dress, can't really work out her figure or her size, and you've got a beautiful bombshell of a blonde here, right? And you had a choice. You have a choice to call out to one of them. Which one will you go for? Who do you think most men would go for?
I don't know. What if she's the blonde?
Yeah, it'll be the bombshell blonde. It'll be the bombshell blonde because the way they've been programmed socially through popular trends and popular media and everything else, that the white Western woman is sexually promiscuous. She is more open to friendliness and open conversations because in their civilization and their parts of the world, men and women mix freely and they are used for commercials for X, Y, and Z and they appear prominently in this and that. So these perceptions are then skewed, distorted, bastardized in people's brains, which then makes them think that every smile is a yes.
Yeah.
Or everything's an invitation.
Yeah.
I'm saying that this could be one perception, but I
think you're absolutely right.
That perception is grounded on the fact that the white Western woman is seen as a godless, promiscuous, body-counted woman to the excesses. So therefore, everyone thinks she's easy game and open for it. And let me get to the grooming. This is linked to the grooming stuff because that's what we asked. If these criminals, the ones in Rotherham, Rochdale, and so forth, if they lived in another area, or if, let's say the demographics were different, let's say for whatever reasons, their local area had a high number of Sikh young girls, or Jewish young girls, or Hindu young girls, or Muslim young girls that came from certain family setups that were about in the park in certain areas when girls from other communities weren't more apparent. For whatever reason, they were in social housing or care homes, whatever was happening in their homes and families. They didn't have male guardians asking them, where are you going, what's happening? Also, they're chilling out, they're having sessions with young lads. They would have seen those same girls as easy game. It just happened, and this is my opinion, I could be wrong, please feel free to correct me, that if it was the fact that the white girls, the white young victims of these horrific crimes, that they happened to be the ones that were available to them and they gave that message. By that message, I mean what these criminals interpreted whatever they meant. And then they basically made into a syndicate. These girls were then being passed over through connections and networks between different towns and areas. It's disgusting. That isn't linked to do with religion. That's not linked to do with Islam or Sharia law. That's not to do with the practice of Prophet Muhammad upon whom be peace. We're talking about a criminal syndicate here, Alex, who targeted the most vulnerable in their respective society and communities. And when they saw the opportunity, they monetized and capitalized on it. And I repeat, they should be condemned. The books should be thrown at them. My issue is that why does that become a Muslim or Islamic issue? That is my only contention to this. And all I'm saying is that these same criminals from Rotherham to Rochdale to all these other towns and cities, if there were Sikh, Muslim, Hindu, non-white girls that for whatever socioeconomic reasons found themselves chilling out at chicken shop places and buying cheap vodka at the corner shop, didn't have a dad looking over them, that they would have also fallen prey to these lot.
Let's talk about...
What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There was a huge opportunism there, and I think it's utterly regrettable. That's not a strong enough word, but I'm a huge sort of campaigner, very outspoken on when it comes to pornography, pornification of society, the whole concept of the Kardashian movement, where you got little girls getting their lips done like this. It's just, I hate it.
What about using women sexually provocatively to sell something like a car? What's your views on that? Or perfume?
There's a line. There's a line to be drawn.
Where's that line?
It's interesting. It's hard to say where that line is. Using a beautiful or attractive woman in an advert happens everywhere, in the same way that using a handsome man to sell a razor. Standard. That is setting the norm, east, west, north, south. Right. Whatever colour of, country, whatever creed.
With exception to maybe a handful of countries, that's the way. Right. A nice, good-looking man sells a certain thing, and a nice, good-looking woman sells a certain thing. It's become the way.
And so I suppose I'm sort of thinking back in my head, I'm sort of looking, trying to imagine a sort of a reel of adverts in the past and the sort of 1950s housewife, and then onwards until you get to
Early
the sort of
noughties.
mad level we've got now.
Early noughties, really. It started from 2000 onwards, I think, and it really peaked after, I'd say, 2010, 15.
Yeah, I think
really
you're right.
peaked, yeah. But the point I'm trying...
Because the thing is, I was never bothered, right? So this is the thing. Being a Western woman, growing up in Western society, I love Formula One, right? It's one of my favourite things on earth. The grid girls never really bothered me, particularly. It's just like, you know, they're walking around holding an umbrella. I'm just clapping like this by the...
But dressed in a particular way to fulfill the eyes and the quench of certain people.
Right, yeah, no, exactly, for the male gaze, indeed. But that never really bothered me. Maybe it's just because I was brought up with it. But what I find so mad about, we're sort of going down a different route now, what I find so mad about the 21st century is we've banned grid girls and we've banned page 3. Good, I'm glad page 3's gone. That was, definitely an outdated thing. But we've...
Was it appropriate?
Yeah, totally inappropriate. But we've banned those things, and yet what we now have is pornography everywhere. You watch music videos.
Free.
Yeah, free.
Free, Alex.
Free to anybody.
And most of those participating that are of which demographic?
Well, it's interesting when you talk about the participants. So, because this is where, when you've got user-generated pornographic content, a lot of those women are trafficked. A lot of those women are not necessarily freely performing because they want to, because they love this. But the representation, the ideal representation is
OnlyFans.
Right,
OnlyFans are willing.
Well, OnlyFans, yeah,
OnlyFans are being
willing.
trafficked.
Yeah, and by and large, the look is white. Usually, you know, the blonde-haired thing.
Hollywood?
Yeah.
What's the depiction?
Right. Let's say that's the case. Yeah.
Does it justify it? No.
No.
It doesn't. But I'll tell you what it does do.
Right.
It makes people think in a particular way, assume certain things, which leads to sexually depraved behaviorisms.
There's, without doubt, there's a lot of young men coming into the country who will have grown up in their respective countries with certain accesses to pornography. A lot of countries ban it. Good. We need to do the same.
It's banned in most Muslim countries.
Yeah, no, I know.
It's banned
exactly.
in most Muslim countries,
yeah. But, you know...
And if you get found guilty of rape or forcible possession, you get killed.
But they're so, you know, people have VPNs. They have ways.
Yeah. Of course, for sure.
But no, they will have... They've come from a country where their women are almost invisible, actually, in some parts of the world. And then they come to somewhere like the United Kingdom, and you've got a girl going around in a teeny tiny dress at night, drinking. You know, this is going to... What do people imagine is going to happen in this scenario? What's going to happen?
I'm so glad you raised
the
this.
scenes like New Year's Eve Cologne. Was it 2000? I always forget the date of it. But when there was the horrific numbers of sexual assaults, even rapes, in the main square of Cologne on New Year's Eve, over 1,200, I think, sexual assaults and rapes. And it was pretty much entirely uniformly men from North Africa and the Middle East who surrounded women. They sort of surrounded. We saw this as well during the Arab Spring. There was that female...
An incident happened in Egypt.
Yeah, exactly, in Egypt. So this happens, right? We've got video evidence, we've seen it, we know it. Now, yes, you can turn around and say we have really drifted far in the West of where there should be discretion, a degree of prudishness, respect for women, and women respecting themselves and understanding, actually, you're not going to be able to suddenly biologically reprogram men or women. And actually, being modest and presenting yourself with humility is just better, right? And that's exactly where I come from as a Christian.
Big up to you, Alex.
But unfortunately, that is not the way in which the Western world has gone. And so now we've got this huge sort of clash.
How often those incidents happen? I just want to kind of ascertain that before I respond, right? And I'm thinking about it, and I'm not even disputing. I knew about the case in the Arab Spring in Egypt. I heard about the story in Cologne.
The Cologne one,
yeah, I heard about this. I just want to understand, and I make this distinction, Alex, right? Is that I can't be a representative or an advocate of people's depraved or un-Islamic ideas. No, yeah, I don't know why certain people do something. I can try to explain it, but what I can certainly say is that if something is grounded on religion, if a group of North African men who, again, let's assume were majority, if not all Muslim, did this, where in their religion and scriptures and teachings does it say that this is okay and this is something that's recommended, obligation, etc.? Rather, you'll find the stark opposite. God says in the Quran explicitly to the men, lower your gaze. Lower your gaze. Don't gaze upon the eyes of the woman. That first gaze is from the inspiration of Satan. The second gaze, don't go for it. So how is that when God tells Muslim men to lower their gaze and the women to dress modestly and the men to fear God, and we also have a kind of requirement, like from navel to knee, I wouldn't have been able to have done this podcast if I was dressed in shorts and my navel was showing. I too have a set of laws I have to subscribe to. Sure, it's more for women because their beauty is seen as something that would have, I'm just letting you know how it is, it would have more of a reaction than if men had more body parts exposed. That's just a belief and an assumption that exists within the Islamic tradition.
Probably rooted in biological fact, actually.
Thank you. I did that on purpose because I wanted you to finish my question. My thing, because it's true.
Yeah.
Right?
Because if men are far more visually.
Thank you very much. The women, as
yeah.
God's creation, are just more beautiful and more pleasing to the eye. And it will have more physiological reactions than if a man was flexing his forearm or his knees or his shin. Now, in Islam, it says not to do those things. Not to approach a woman who is not from your direct family lineage. How is it that where a religion says that you can't even really kiss, hug or touch your first cousin? So my first female cousins, under Islamic law, I can't touch them, right? I can only physically touch my mother, my maternal grandmother's grandparents, sisters, wife. So how is it that Sharia law has a very strict requirement in this area, but then there's this demographic of Muslim men in some countries that resort to this type of behavior? I will start off by saying that they're not behaving in a Muslim or Islamic way. And I'm going to repeat, I'm like a song on repeat. I'm going to carry on saying that. Where I believe that Islam does say how to deal with Islam. So if Islam was in a civilizational war with the West, and there were lands that were being conquered, and wars were taking place, there are clear instructions in the Quran which says how you should fight, who you should fight, etc. and so forth. But where there is no religious justification, to my knowledge or research, I can't give a reason where there isn't one. Do you understand, Alex? So these guys are behaving in an un-Islamic way. They are behaving in a haram, prohibited way. Because I don't know that these things happen under the justification of women. I am not blaming the victim. I am not blaming white Western women. I am just saying that this perception exists, and some messed up guys, sexually depraved, sexually deprived, whatever you want to say, maybe there is a disconnect.
There's no element, you don't think, of a sort of teaching.
I don't.
Anywhere.
Nah,
that it's sort of like these women are of less value.
No, of course not. I need Quranic statements. I need verses from the Quran. I need to hear prophetic statements. Now, if your critics are going to be like, Alex, you forgot to ask him about Muhammad's concubines. Yeah, that was a time where concubines were normal. That's where everyone had concubines. The biblical prophets had concubines. Yeah, it was the part of it was the normalcy of warfare of the time that you would take concubines, and when you conquer a land, you take people as slaves. This was something that was normal, or if whatever the setup or reality was, Christians did it, Muslims did it. In fact, we say Islam came to actually regulate that.
Old Testament did it. The interesting thing about Christianity, of course, is New Testament, where all of a sudden Jesus comes and this stuff isn't cool anymore.
And this is where Islam and Christianity and its manifestation and its pull and its gravitation and its marketing differs. You were just there, correct me if I'm wrong, were very quick to do away with the God of the Old Testament when he's the same God according to your belief of the New Testament. We don't reject the old and the past. Start to end, what God says is the truth. I have seen so many Christians that are so quick to throw their faith under the bus by saying, oh, well, that was the God of the Old Testament. But the God of the Old Testament, according to your belief, is the same God and Jesus of the New Testament. So,
but in terms of
we've not had a reformation like Christianity.
Right, that's what I was going to say.
And we're not going to have one.
Right,
we're not going to have one. There's been attempts. There'll be continued attempts. And I'm firmly of the belief that whilst Islam has certainly and is in the process of dealing with new realities that it's never faced before, it will not have the Christian Reformation movement. It will not have anything remotely close to it. Shall I tell you why?
Why?
Because the antagonism and the friction between the Christian populace of Europe and the Roman Catholic Church was never present in Islamic civilization. We had civil wars, we had power struggles, we had sectarian strifes and rifts and all that kind of stuff. But there was never in Islamic civilization, Alex, and I invite you to do research, text me later and say, Dilly, you were wrong, you BS'd in our show. You're not going to find it. There was never a friction between the access to religion and religious scripture for the general populace in Islam like there was in Europe. The way the poor were prevented from accessing religious scripture. The Bible was translated to English just like 300-400 years ago. Not everyone knew Latin. People weren't even given access.
When people study the Quran, don't they by and large need to read it in Arabic?
No, they read it in Arabic, then they read a translation or exegesis, either in their own language or in the Arabic. But the learning and the teaching of the Arabic language was something that was institutionalized for our history for centuries. So the point I'm trying to make is that there won't be a reformation in Islam where there wasn't a friction in the first place between access to knowledge and the religious authorities itself. That was a distinctly European issue. Muslims never had the friction with their religious authorities that Europeans did with Rome. That didn't exist. There wasn't a need to kind of free the general populace from the oppressive nature of the Christian church based in Rome. We didn't have that problem. We had dictators, we had authoritarian sultans and caliphs, but there was never a kind of religious hurdle or obstacle to prevent Muslims from accessing their faith. That's why the Muslims had their golden era. They contributed significantly to the Enlightenment thinkers. Jean-Jacques Rousseau got his social contract theory from the works of Imam Ghazali. When the Crusades happened, there was a huge cultural influx and infusion. We revived Greek texts, which many historians argue contribute to the Renaissance. I want your camp to know more about this, not us flexing, oh, we were great once. But there is actually periods in time.
So to put it bluntly, what's gone wrong? Because it's interesting to talk that, because when you look around Morocco, for instance.
For us,
yeah,
we would say two things. The main two issues for me, at least, and I think most Muslims would agree with me. Number one, I swear to you, this is not blaming colonialism. It's just the very recent reality of colonialism and how Islam as a political force in its ability to govern people of that region was taken away in a very abrupt way and replaced with despotic regimes of whom still come and train in Sandhurst. We still have weapons being sold to them, and they do not want to see any kind of return to a more purist Islamic way of life, even remotely attempting it, because that will affect their own hegemonic rule over their respective states. I'm not going to go into mentioning countries or governments because I want to continue visiting them. But you can work out which regimes we're selling weapons to, which regimes we have no problems when they do beheadings and stoned the adulterer, which countries we have very close relations with by lowering the half-mast when their kings die, which Islamists that Thatcher was happy to support during the first Afghan war, calling them great freedom fighters, giving them hundreds and thousands of pounds of British taxpayers' money. Which Islamists and which Muslims, which ragheads that we support and have no problem when we're buying oil from them. The point is that it's the issue of consistency and the geopolitical reality that Muslims find themselves in, number one. Number two, the ills of the Muslim societies and Islamic civilization is actually as a result of us moving away from Islam, Alex. You know, sometimes I'm criticized because people say, yeah, you know, you're always bashing white Brits and the country of your birth. You should be more grateful, stuff like that. Fine, whatever. The point I'm trying to make is that the Muslim world is also experiencing its own issues. The things, the oppression, the injustice, we can blame the external factors as much as we want. And it's true and it's real. You can blame the Brits and the Americans and the Europeans as much as you want. And there is truth to it, and there's leverage, and there's a case to be presented for it. I agree with most of it. But there's also an introspective reality that the Muslim people as a collective ummah, as a collective nation, that we have moved away from God. And as a result, these are the fruits of those things. So when you say those things are happening in Morocco, or there are Muslim men who are supposed to be ambassadors and vanguards of the faith, who are supposed to be righteous and chivalrous and just, are doing things, whether it's 1, 100 or 10,000 of them, it's un-Islamic, it's haram, and they will be accounted in the hereafter for these acts. Because nowhere in our religion does it say that the non-Muslim woman is lesser than the Muslim woman in terms of how you deal with them and treat them and so forth. If people are going to cite verses or prophetic statements pertaining to war or during periods of war, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to entertain that. But generally, how do you deal with the non-Muslim? You can disagree with their beliefs. You can believe that if they die upon this belief, they're probably going to burn in hell for eternity. But does that mean you deal with them unjustly? You're not polite? You're not respectful? You're not courteous? You're not chivalrous? That is Muslim masculinity, Alex. Now, cultural interpretations of that may vary in Afghanistan. It'll vary in Egypt. It'll vary in Saudi. But none of these countries, Alex, at least from my perspective, I do not regard any of the 50 plus Muslim majority secular nation states as a, what's that noise? Is that from one of the rooms?
No.
There you go, I said it and they stopped quiet. Let me just finish this bit. None of these countries, Alex, for me, qualify or meet the threshold, as far as I'm aware about Islamic jurisprudence, they meet the threshold of an Islamic society or an Islamic state. We're not saying that they're an embodiment and a manifestation of how a true Islamic society should look like. In fact,
in the same way that America and the UK isn't exactly the embodiment of Christianity.
but they don't even claim that.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You can have the Church of England, you can have the king or the monarch as the head of state figuratively, but let's be honest, the lawmakers and the legislators are in the Commons. What you've described, what we've discussed, the grooming gangs, the kind of very perverted behavior from some men that we should assume that they are either Muslim or come from Muslim countries. I have no other response to give to you except that they must have a perception of certain types of women. And they must have a very skewed and messed up and distorted and un-Islamic assumption that what they have seen elsewhere or what they have heard doesn't permeate in reality as an invitation to anything. These are the only arguments I can make. The only arguments I can make is that if a man, black, brown or white, Muslim or non-Muslim, sees a sexual opportunity to do something with a woman, right? Physiologically, men are wired differently to women. We all have a innate instinct to procreate. It's about how you go about doing it.
It's interesting. I mean, by the way, I just want to say I love Morocco. I have to use it as an example because it's a recent one, but I remember the last time I spoke about this, I looked, and I was like, I love Morocco. I've had the most wonderful experiences, and I go back time and time again. It's interesting because do you think, actually, when it comes to integration, assimilation, that if we were a more Christian society, there would be less friction as well, because we'd find so much more in common.
100%. Did you read my piece, my letter to the Patriots? Yeah. What did you think? Because that was as hot.
You said go and believe in your Christian God, go and get married, go and have children.
If you're not going to accept my religion, which I think is actually the truth, then go and follow your own religion.
Yeah, go follow yours.
Which there will be overlaps.
Yeah.
That's not me encouraging people to become Christians. I'm saying if you're going to reject Islam, at least hold on to some values that you can say that this is something which is godly or has some source.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
It's funny because I thought that, when we spoke on the phone before doing this, the amount of stuff we're just like, yeah, absolutely. The problems we're faced with in society, because by and large the West has turned its back. The West thinks itself as God. It thinks science is God. It thinks freedom.
It's made us God.
Yes, it's made us God.
It's
made
us
freedom
God.
Completely limitless. There's free will, but the teachings of the Bible, and I assume the Quran.
Those things that you've just described and
I'm
admitted.
a Christianist.
Yeah. but if those things that you've just described there, about how Western Europe or the Western world, however you want to geographically label it, has moved away from Christian values in a meaningful way, in a societal way, right? Am I an Islamist for not wanting that in the Muslim world?
No, I think it's interesting because the term is Islamist is hugely pejorative, as you well know. Wishing that your
that we had more
tradition that is tied to religion, social mores, customs and values are protected and celebrated, I think is a very normal thing.
Okay.
But it's just that difference. I think specifically when it comes to women and the treatment of women and women's freedom, you know, here's my hair out. That's the bit that, you know, concerns me. That is the bit as a woman. That's the bit that I've spoken about a lot. That I've sort of gained a bit of notoriety about, and I've often said, when I lived in Ghana, I lived in the Muslim neighbourhood. I've worked in Pakistan. I lived in India, albeit the south. So you didn't really find that many Muslims there. Lived for a year in Kenya. Ghana and Kenya are really interesting when it comes to, especially Ghana. Right? I don't know what the
Muslims are 10 to 15%. We're not majority. Ghana is Christian majority.
It's a Christian majority. But everyone just rubs along quite nicely. There isn't this sense of, when I was sort of, working in the TV station, just people were people. There wasn't really this sense of the religions being massively different. And I always think in Ghana, and I could be wrong about this, but you've got Christianity max and Islam light over there.
What do you mean? Christianity?
Max. So very Christian, extremely Christian. And yet the Islam seems to be more sort of less orthodox.
Okay.
Say.
Okay. No, I think what you're basically displaying here, and I'll tell you what it is. West Africa has a bit more of a distinct history in its relationship with Islam and how Islam was spread there. So Islam was spread historically via three ways. Jihad, war, so like expansion, yeah. Number two, missionary work, right? Or as in Arabic, da'wah, right? So people conveying the message, sending out people to different parts of the world, like the Christians did, sending out different people, different states. That's why, in the same way, Christians, even though we don't have a concept enshrined per se in the way the Christians have, why do we have saints buried all different parts of the world? Christianity and Islam, Alex, is a global domination religions. I think Christians need to wake up to that a bit more. Because what's been happening is that European colonialism and global domination from Western civilization has been happening. But what people understand is that there is a Christian justification for it. So if there's a Christian justification for it, to save people from the pits of hellfire, and to civilize the uncivilized, and to bring to them the Christian faith and salvation in Jesus Christ, which was very prominent and very, very present in the British Empire as well as other European empires. Islam similarly, but not like that, also spread through missionary work and war and jihad, and from an empire point of view. There was also trade and commerce. Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Western Africa. Many of these countries did not experience conquest or jihad or things like this. So that obviously is historically now kind of ingrained in that kind of the DNA of that region, right? There's a reason why the politics of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh is very different to the politics of Indonesia, Malaysia. It's very different. It's not a coincidence that the Algerian or North African experience in France is distinctly different to the Turkish experience in Germany, which is very different to the South Asian experience that we have with our countries of birth and our former colonizer. It's very reflective of how those relationships formed over centuries, right? And up to recent history. So given that Islam spreads like that, or has historically spread through war, spread through missionary work, and spread through trade, that affects different parts of the Muslim majority world. You'll find in some Muslim majority countries, things are quite mellow. It's not that they're not orthodox. It's just that the type of Islam there is a bit more mellow, or that there's such a majority that there's no one to have any friction with. It could also be that there's a uniformity in the vast majority of that given country to one particular school of thought. The reasons vary, but the flavor of Islam is different wherever you go. Some countries are far more, conservative. I think Afghanistan would probably be the most conservative, ultra-conservative, even by conservative standards of Iran and Saudi. Right, Saudi much less so under Mohammed bin Salman. One could argue that none of the 50-plus majority Muslim countries they even claim it, or that they are in reality an Islamic society in its comprehensive point of view, from a legislative point of view, from a lawmaking point of view, from a judicial point of view, from a criminal penal code point of view, from an economical fiscal point of view. How can any Muslim majority country claim to be Islamic when there is such a huge prohibition of usury in Islam? Interest, usury. So it falls in most hurdles of what would qualify or meet the modern threshold. So that's why when people cite examples of ex-Muslim country, that Muslim country, that Muslim country, and they've had this experience or they saw that there, I will just say that, look, none of these countries claim to be Islamic. They are Muslim societies, Muslim majority societies with some elements of Islamic values within them. But the only thing I could say about these perceptions towards women, because that's where we were coming from, right? These perceptions of women, I can only repeat that Islam is a patriarchal faith, in the same way that we believe Christianity and Judaism is. It's not the fault of Muslims or Islam that Christianity and Judaism has abandoned that or lessened its prominence as men of the household, or as men as natural leaders, or celebrating the contributions of men, and celebrating the feminine nature of women and how they contribute to learning and, bringing up the future generation of aspiring good Muslim men and women. That's not the fault of Muslims that we still hold on to these things, but they're very much in the Old Testament, the New Testament, it's in the Torah, it's all there. There's nothing that you could really criticize Muslims for, except that we follow it more than the Jews and Christians. That's
Although
what
I would
believe.
say in the New Testament, the approach, but the relation between men and women is definitely on an equal footing. It's definitely a far more equal footing.
And in Islam it
man
is as well.
serves wife, wife serves man.
Sure. And they serve them differently though in Islam. That's what it is. In the eyes of Allah, in the eyes of God, the man and the woman is the same. Their maqam or their status, I'm just dropping a few Arabic words, but their status is the same in the eyes of God. They differ in their responsibilities, their obligations, and their commitment to God, Alex. Now that's where things will differ. Who is supposed to be the breadwinner? Who is the chaperone? Who inherits what? Who is the protector and overseer of what? Who has the final word? That's where we will differ. But in terms of equity and status and worth in the eyes of God, I swear by God, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, there is no lesser of the woman in the eyes of God than the man. There isn't. You're a Christian, that means you believe that we all come from Adam, right? Is Eve any lesser because she was created from the rib of Adam? Is she any lesser?
No.
But she was necessary for the humankind and mankind to continue, right? We wouldn't be here. If you truly believe in that, then we know that in the eyes of God, the female creation is symbiotic and necessary, pivotal to the survival of man. It's just that we have it in a very different way and see how women flourish and men flourish in certain positions and roles differently. And that would manifest differently culturally in different Muslim countries. Otherwise, I am not going to sit here and say that, in Islam, men and women are the same and therefore there's equity and equality in every single thing. I'm sorry, there isn't. That doesn't exist. And I don't think that will ever change. In fact, I know it will never change because those things are enshrined in God's book, in the Quran, which we believe to be unchanged, untainted, and the unadulterated speech of God, the final message to mankind. And if God is saying that this is what the role of the women is, and this is what the role of the man is, then aspire towards that. Aspire towards it. My wife worked. She went to university. My two sisters went to university. They weren't allowed to stay out. They weren't allowed to kind of stay on campus for 3 years. My dad used to commute, bring them back and forth. I got to stay in Norwich. I went to University of East Anglia. My younger brother went to Bradford University. Did my dad prevent education for his children, Alex? No. But he differed towards how that would manifest between the man, his sons and his daughters. My sisters were not prevented from education. They were given the same access as me. But culturally and religiously, it was more appropriate for us to stay out in a city far away from home than it was for my sisters. I would argue that they are more successful socioeconomically and from a status class point of view than I am. We just have a different way of doing things. But though you can't, I'll conclude on this. if you are someone who claims to be a cultural Christian, a devout Christian, a Christian nationalist, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, whatever it may be, and you're true and sincere to your beliefs, you know that a lot of the stuff that I'm saying isn't coming as alien to you. Sure, times have changed. You can argue that. Times have changed. Things are legal now that weren't legal 30, 40 years ago. There are things that were criminalized 30 years ago that are now criminalized if you criticize it now, Alex. Without going into details, you can work it out, yeah? You can't say to me what I'm saying to you is alien, because it roots back to those similar shared traditions of the Torah, of the Testament, of the Bible, and finally the Quran. And the only thing that we differ in is how committed we are in implementing this as much as we can in our life. I think that's where Muslims, especially Western-born Muslims, who actually in many cases are actually more religiously zealous than many of the Muslim counterparts in the Muslim world, right? And I would be lying, actually. And this is you can call it a homage. You can call it like a not a thanks, but something I acknowledge that Muslims in the West are able to actually explore and research their faith more because of the freedoms granted by Western governments than they can in the Muslim majority world, where researching a certain book or saying certain arguments that I have today can land you in jail, can mean you're getting kidnapped by the security services, tortured. I swear to you, Alex, I'm being serious with you. Forget about Christians and Christians being oppressed in Muslim countries. Muslims are being oppressed in Muslim countries. The jails and the dungeons of these dictators across the Muslim world are filled with Islamic scholars and reformists who don't want to be dependent on the West, who don't want to do this brain drain of sending our young to the Western world as economic units, want them to stay in the Muslim world and build a deeper connection and commit back so we are not dependent on the Western world. Dungeons are filled with scholars and reformists like this, Alex, but no one brings their stories. So all I'm saying is, to conclude before I hand it over to you, is that some of the things that you're saying, which I agree with, most of the things which you're saying, we actually agree on the root causes.
Yeah.
I just think we disagree and differ in the solutions. That's what it is.
Should we just finish on that? Because we've been chatting ages.
I've been chatting a lot.
Yep, but that's what you're here for, right?
I was hoping you'd chat a bit more.
But let's finish on that. Because part of us doing this is to sort of say, well, let's get together, let's talk about things, let's sort of see how life could be improved. I think it's fairly honest and open and fair to say that there are the mosques in this country that are probably teaching things that really perhaps they need to be careful what they're saying. There's videos online of radical preachers saying things, right? We know that takes
Anything
place.
Specific? I need to know specifics.
Well, no, but there's on my own station did a...
After October the 7th, the sermons against the Jews and prayers and supplications against the Jews. Ya Allah, destroy the Jews and that kind of stuff.
Things like that.
Okay.
We also know that there are sort of pockets of issues within Muslim communities, the social issues we've spoken about, whether it be the grooming gangs, so on and so forth.
I accept that they exist. I just don't take responsibility from it from the standpoint of faith.
Faith, yeah. So if we are to say... we need to live in a world where, like you said, there's no reversal of the demographic situation we're in. There's no all of a sudden saying, oh, I know, let's just
You not believe in repatriation and remigration?
Well, just sending, get on an aeroplane then, see you, Dilly.
Well, I want a nice big check first.
But no, I mean, that to me is inhuman and barbaric when someone has made this their home. Now, if people wanted to talk about managing immigration in the future in a different way, that's another conversation.
Agreed.
And I think that there's something to be said for saying, actually, when we're looking at how we want to address immigration issues, is it wrong for a country like the United Kingdom to say we'd have open visa-free travel with, say, Australia, but then these countries not? I mean, actually, strangely, we don't do that. We don't have any sort of visa-free agreement with Australia. But we have a situation where we have 4 million Muslims here, and that's going to, the percentage as...
it's about 5%.
Yeah, that's going to keep increasing, I'd imagine, with demographic
in a
shifts.
very incremental, small way. I mean, we just don't know what the future holds. One of the concluding... I think this is wicked, actually. I'm so glad you brought it back to this. What's the picture going to look like in 2050?
Yes, that's what I want.
Should we wrap up on that? What do you think the picture is going to look like in 2050? What do you think and what do you want? Tell me the truth.
Okay, what do I think? I don't know. I don't have any facts to hand, but I think we're going to be in a situation where I would imagine in the United Kingdom, white people are probably still, I don't know, I'd have to look at the demographic projections on this, but the percentage is going to be lower than it is
We're talking
today.
about white folk here, yeah?
We're talking about white folk.
And then
Now,
tell me
when it
about Christianity. So tell me white and then
this
Christianity.
is interesting. Christianity, I don't know what's going on
At the moment, Christianity is this.
It's gone like this.
Is this. From a
But
recent...
there's something happening at the moment in certain pockets where there's a little resurgence, a revival, because I kind of think
I see it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that societies do and they don't know they're doing it. Your birth rates often drop for reasons.
Mm-hmm.
You get more men born in certain periods than women, and it's a bit like sort of, I don't know, bacteria in a petri dish. You don't always understand why your society or your particular generation is behaving in a certain way. So in terms of where we go with Christianity, I don't know whether you'll find actually a turning of a corner. I think that it's very easy when you're in a particular decade or an era to think it's going to be like this forever, and it never is.
Never is.
It never is. And I'm pretty sure in about 20 years' time, people will look back on the hyper-liberalism of today, the hypersexualization, the hyper-liberalism, especially with some of the sick things that have been done to kids, and just go, what were we thinking? You know, this was mad. Most generations, younger generations, absolve themselves of their parents' ideologies and build something new for themselves. And I actually think that what we've got coming up underneath us, the Gen Zers and the Gen Alphas are going to actually be more societally conservative. And that excites me. That's positive.
Gen Alpha especially.
Yeah. That's very positive. I want to see that happen.
But does that necessarily mean a correlation to religiosity? That's what we'd have to see.
Well, it's interesting because the thing is, this stuff, as you were saying, when it comes to Islam, so much of this stuff is born out of religion. And so if you try and sort of separate the two and go, right, this is what we're going to have culturally, but we're going to just sort of throw religion away, it doesn't work.
No, because tradition in most cases is rooted in religion.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't work if you throw one away. And I think human beings are far better off when they have a religion. I think they've got better societal structures, they've got better values, because they've got free will, but it's impinged by a social order that everyone can share. And that's why I actually
And healthy restrictions.
And healthy restrictions.
Healthy restrictions.
It's where I think that if we were a more Christian nation, actually the assimilation between Christians and Muslims would be closer, potentially.
And I think the debates would be better.
Yeah.
I think because we haven't really seen a Christian state that is ardently, unapologetically Christian, because we've never seen how that would play out.
Yeah,
we don't have to, because
it's weird because we're not allowed to be in this country, and again, not the fault of the Muslims, the fault of our own people. The white middle classes have done this.
That's why I mentioned the Victorian era, because if you speak to most historians or Christian nationalists in the UK, I'll say, right, when was the last golden era of Christianity in Britain? They'll usually say the Victorian period, right? And if that's the case, then during the Victorian period, there was no multiculturalism. There wasn't mass waves of migration from the Commonwealth, from the former empire, right? So we don't have an example of a Christian state which manages a sizable Muslim minority of whom they share biblical and religious values and overlaps, like they have done historically during the age of empires. I don't believe that when people were crossing between the Islamic empires and the Byzantine Empire, or these kind of like frontier periods in pre-modern times, that they stepped over one border and all of a sudden their values changed overnight.
No, of course.
No, of course not. I think there'd be way more synergy and similarities, irrespective of how the civilization and empires were at war, mainly for worldly reasons. The reality is that we don't have an example of what Christian rule would look like, let alone how it would deal with Muslim minorities or other non-faith minorities. We actually do. We can take it back to the Inquisition and the Reconquista, but we wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want that as a Muslim. You don't want that, do you, Alex? No. But look, I want to be optimistic, because as a Muslim, I have to be optimistic. I would want the best for my country of birth and residence, even if for selfish reasons, Alex. Let's put religion aside. Let's put our main selfish reasons. I don't want war, civil war, unrest, disunity in the country or region where I'm residing with my family. Because it puts my family and my survival in danger. No one wants that. I accept and I acknowledge that there are genuine concerns to do with mass migration and immigration, particularly from Muslim majority countries. I acknowledge all of this. I acknowledge that there is a frustration, anger amongst white Brits and white Westerners who are seeing the erosion of their culture, their identity, the values that their grandparents once espoused, what greatness they believe that they once were, all at the expense and at the pandering and appeasement of these Muslims coming over.
We say that because but it's not necessarily the pandering and appeasement of Muslims coming over, because like I said, it's the white middle classes who've done this to our own culture.
So I'm just about to wrap up on that. I'm going to basically say that your anger is at the wrong people. I've already explained that it doesn't matter where you put a Muslim on this earth. They're going to marry, they're going to have children, and if there is an opportunity to convey their message, their religion, whether through practice, relationships, open proselytization, if there is a legal opportunity there, they will do it. Because like Christians once were, we are a missionary religion. And we want to save whole of humanity from the pits of hellfire. Christians believe the same. What kind of Christian are you if you don't believe in that? What kind of Christian are you if you don't believe that for eternal salvation and to save humanity and mankind from the pits of hellfire and the satanic way of Lucifer, that you don't want to convey the truth to them and you want them to subscribe to it? Islam is no different. All I'm saying is that for some reason in the last 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years, the Western world has forgotten that.
Yeah.
They're still carrying on with the expansion. They're still carrying on with the my point of view. They're still carrying on with the neo-colonialism and the imperialism and the kind of all of that stuff. But they've kind of forgotten that Islam also has that tradition. There was a civilizational deadlock for the best part of a millennia between Islam and Europe. We nearly, and by we I mean the Islamic civilization, nearly entered Austria, right? It did enter Spain. It was there for 800 years. It's in the Balkans. There is a mixed and shared heritage, whether you like it or not. Whether I don't want to or Alex don't want it, it's there. The history books have documented it. That when there was war between the Islamic world and the Christian world, there was also an exchange of ideas. There was also a process of learning. I am saying let's try and go back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Does that mean you and I are going to Speaker's Corner, the Saracen and the
Right,
Crusader, and dealing with all of this alphabet, all the alphabet people?
But remember what I said, we only tend to be friends in Pride Month. Outside of that, we're still at each other's throats. I just think that, look, just anger and channel your anger towards the right people, the ruling elite and the corporations and the neoliberal capitalists who gain from cheap labor and incentivizing people to come over to the Western world. Speak to the warmongers who...
And they want cultural ground zero, these people.
Well, then what do you do then, Alex?
Ground zero.
But then it's not fair to them bash Muzzi's, Pakis and Turks.
No.
It's not fair. You cannot, on the one hand, say that we understand the reason why people are coming here as economic units to live a better life from the Sharia shitholes. Remember, I'm using all these lines because they're lines that are commonly thrown at me in Twitter and by my critics.
I've never heard Sharia.
Sharia shithole, go back to shithole, deport them. These are all standard everyday lines that I hear from patriots. Whether they are synonymous fake accounts in Delhi, in India, pretending to be white Christian patriots, or they're actually Christian patriots, there's always this reference to go back to where you come from. If you don't like it here, go back to it.
I've had to silence the word rape on X. That's the one that I get a lot.
Oh God, that's horrible and that's disgusting.
Yeah,
all I'm saying is that I understand that all these grievances and these concerns and frustrations exist. I understand all of it. I'm just going to conclude by saying just channel it to the right people. You incentivize any people to come over to your country based on the ideology that you purport, the living standards and the lifestyle you claim, the dream that you show the world, the liberals and the liberalism and the freedoms and the secularism that you champion to the rest of the world. Once they come over to your countries, don't complain then when they also have their own skewed versions of what that entails. Right? And that's all I'm saying. The people that are coming over here as economic units, it's because there must be incentives or opportunities that are there for them to attain.
You can't blame an individual for taking the opportunity to...
And at the same time, my last sentence, history is so key. I do not complain, I rarely hear Muslims complaining about losing Islamic Spain when they were there for 800 years. I don't even hear about Muslims grieving or crying about, oh, we lost India when the Brits arrived in 1757. No, because to moan and cry and whinge about old wars that were lost, yeah, or to blame every single thing on colonialism, and there's no responsibility to introspectively look at how you're going to change your neck of the world, right? What I would say is this: there is a very recent historical link that links the events and the ongoing events of that part of the world, the Muslim majority world, which includes South Asia, the Far East, the Middle East and North Africa, and things that are still happening now, Alex, that makes the kind of societal setup that we have right now undesirable from your camp, from a demographic point of view, undesirable from...
Would you be, just very, very quick final question, would you be less happy, more happy, it wouldn't make a shadow of difference to you if the UK became more assertively Christian?
Again, I wouldn't know how that looks like.
Likewise.
The only historical, and I'm not saying this to pull your leg or to have a dig, the only example we have of how Christians dealt with Muslims, yes, after we conquered Spain. No one's denying that we didn't conquer Spain in the first place. But after we had been there for 800 years, Alexa, that's a long time, 800 years. If Reconquista and the Inquisition and a modern version of that is what a Christian state looks like, I would not support that.
No, I just mean if it stood up for its own, if it promoted Christianity a lot more. If it wore its Christianity loud and proud, if it pushed for Christianity and we had more Christian programs on television, Christian messaging,
wicked.
You know, sort of
wicked
proper Christianity, not like commercial Christianity.
Wicked from the perspective that in comparison to what's happening now, the content, what's being broadcast, watershed or not, and stuff that is accessible on social media now, of course, to have something that is more biblical and God-centric would be better as an option. Of course, as a Muslim, I'd prefer Quran being played to you around the clock, but you're giving me an option. I just don't know how a Christian state would look like. We do have many examples of how Muslims have dealt with Christians as minorities. We have centuries, over 1,000-year history. There were cases, yes, they had a religious tax to pay called the jizya. The jizya is a special tax that Jews and Christians paid, and when they paid that tax, they would be exempt from military service. Their property, their land, their honor, their lineage would be protected. There'd be no obligation or expectation for them to fight for the Muslim country. And yes, during the Ottoman period, there was a policy that they had where they took one Christian son from one household, incorporated them into the military system, and there were tensions in the Balkans pertaining to that. We have history of how we have dealt with Christians as minorities under Islamic law. We don't have any examples of how Christians have dealt with Muslims as minorities under Christian law. We do have about 70, 80 years of how a Christian land or region has dealt with minorities under secular law. And I just want us to have more conversations like this. Bear responsibility and accountability where it is, Alex. Hold a mirror to one another. And I wrote in my letter to the Patriots, I said that, look, there's 2 billion Muslims, and I have a deep, special, godly ordained love and affinity for my ummah, the global Muslim collective nation, which has criminals, evildoers, wrongdoers, good, bad and ugly and all of it. But I also have an affinity with my qawm. My qawm is my people. Again, patriots will laugh at me and disagree with me, but that is the white indigenous majority. You are my qawm. You are the people that, when I was born onto this world, I have grown up with you, in your society, albeit in our little sheltered areas in Midlands or the North. Now I'm talking generically here, Alex, yeah? But we still were raised and brought up 60, 70 years in now amongst white British folk. And we want good for them. Where we differ and disagree, and this shouldn't come as a surprise, because if you speak to a devout Christian or you speak to a devout ideological communist, they perceive a society that would be better according to their worldview. Correct, Alex? If you're an ideologue or you're a firm believer of a particular set of worldviews, you'd think or believe that society would be better run according to that worldview, right?
Yeah.
Muslims are no different to that. The distinction is that there is a misconception that Muslims are trying to Islamize society and hoodwink, and overnight through a demographic shift, one day you guys are going to wake up and there's going to be an announcement of a military coup with the black flag in Parliament. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
And that's not to Keir to say that.
And that's not for Keir to say that either. And that's not going to happen. Let's just better understand each other. Let's have interfaith where we talk about elephants in the room, where we talk about uncomfortable truths, where you won't deny the existence of criminals in your community, whether you subscribe to their justifications or not, or whether a community should be collectively responsible for it or not. Let's move past that. Let's just accept that no one wants war, civil war, unrest, friction, an increase in crime in our societies, Muslim or non-Muslim. Of course, if criminals are coming to any country, the governments of those countries should have vigorous laws in place to protect their people. I'm not against any of that. What I'm against is forgetting history, very recent history, the last 23 years of the war on terror, and how those things have affected British-born or European-born Western Muslims. We just need to have more conversation, just be more honest. At the end of the day, any frustrations and anger amongst Tommy Robinson supporters or Douglas Murray supporters or anyone from the right, centrist, civic nationalist, Christian nationalist, whatever nationalism you subscribe to. By the way, I'm a massive critic of nationalism. I find it to be a very shallow and survivalist ideology, because you always need to be in a constant threat of survival and extinction for it to thrive. That's why I don't believe nationalism. I believe people should be able to connect on values and morals and understandings, right? That's just my view. All I'm saying to Christian nationalists and white nationalists and British patriots out there, with all these concerns that you've mentioned and the things that you'll see on GB News and Talk TV and other channels, is that we do not deny the existence of them. What I reject is the narrative, the ideological spin, the unwarranted and unfair labeling and targeting of the Muslim community when you should actually be looking closer to home. And that's why I think we should have more honest discussions like we've had, Alex. Yeah. And I'm actually quite grateful I said yes to this, because as I said to you before we started filming, the stars kind of aligned. Season 3 was coming to an end. I wanted something different for season 4. I'm opening it with this. I hope you've understood that. I don't know what you would have expected from me when you reached out to 5 Pillars for this, but I tried being as courteous and as respectful and as accommodating as possible. And let's just have honest and frank conversations, right? Hurty words aside and stuff aside, but let's just deal with each other as human beings. Yeah. And that's one of the contentions I would have with your previous guest on this show, because this is your show as well. This episode is Tommy. Now, I know you've described him as a wonderful guy, and that's fine. That's your personal view. But I believe as a Muslim, and I hope you agree as a Christian, that the starting point of conversations and dialogue and discourse has to be one grounded in mutual respect and not insulting your holy book, your prophet, your God, your notion of the Trinity, your notion of this and that. If I start off a conversation by saying your mum's a bitch, whilst I'm legally allowed to say it, that's not going to be good cricket.
I think he's... Look, we don't have much time to get into the Tommy thing. I think he's a man who's gone through various evolutions at the moment. Really? I put a lot of this down to class as well. And I think that he has grown a lot from where he was to where he is now. And I didn't really have much of a view on him at all until I interviewed him, and I found him to be extremely bright. Do
you think he's good for the British people?
I think he's necessary. I think he's a phenomenon. I think he's necessary. I think he's a phenomenon. I think that because, take the individual out of this, he is almost reflective of the conversation we've just had in terms of talking about, okay, where do we need to point the finger of blame? Governments, because I think that's pretty much where he is.
Yeah, but I agree with you. It's actually a reflection of this conversation, all the different things that we've discussed. My only contention would be is his contribution to that discourse has been highly problematic because of whom I believe he has either purposely, intentionally, this is my view alone, and the view of many Muslims and many of his non-Muslim critics, is that he has purposely, conveniently laid blame at the wrong people. You can't be establishment...
Well, yes and no. I mean, again, we'll sort of end up doing a whole other interview now about Tommy.
Yeah, but, which I definitely don't want this
which
to
we
be.
Shouldn't do.
No.
But he the backstory, the things that his community suffered in Luton, the way initially he tried to deal with things, the way that, because you were saying earlier when we were talking about the weakness of local authorities in not wanting to tackle issues, again, I think that he has sort of meted out his criticism towards them as well. He is a phenomenon, he's a product of an age in which we live. He's got the courage to stand up and realise that something needs to be said against that conspiracies of silence within local authorities and within the establishment. And like you're saying, honest, open conversation. For that, I think he's a brave man. Yeah, for that, I think that he has put his head above the parapet where not even one politician in Westminster.
We've agreed on so much. To conclude on a disagreement is actually, I never expected that to happen. But yeah, I think the perception of him is quite juxtaposed.
Yeah, I don't think he's as bad as he has been made out to look. Being made out to look by the establishment, because they don't want to have inconvenient conversations. They don't want to.
You speak to many Muslims or people, only because on this particular subject matter there would be agreement between Muslims and kind of the anti-racist, left-leaning socialists, whatever you want to call them, is that I would see Tommy Robinson as someone who's actually been enabled and facilitated by the establishment. At the end of the day, if the establishment wants to shut down debate and discourse, it absolutely can. Now, if anyone's going to cite the recent contempt of court where he's currently doing time for, well, there's a legal precedent for that. That's a question to now have about the judicial lawmaking and the legal precedents of these laws. But many Muslims and many of his critics, non-Muslim critics, would regard him as someone who's been enabled and who's been given the space to actually grow. That was certainly the case during the EDL. I find Tommy to be or those from that kind of ideology, in the way they see the revival of British patriotism or nationalism, I've seen it just be channeled and directed at the wrong people purposely. And he's been someone who's been enabled and given the space to grow by the watchful eye of the establishment. That's the view, I'm just saying, that many of our viewers and our community would hold of Tommy. And that's put in a very, very, very politely. How is that me and you have had... Shane, how long has this conversation been?
2 hours and 15.
How is it that we've had a 2.5 hour conversation, right? And
giving Joe Rogan a run for his money. We have the length of this.
You've made it abundantly clear where you come from and how you see certain things, which I think without compromise, you've done that. I think I've done the same. We've done that without deeply insulting what is close to us. And that's just generally not how human interaction is supposed to happen. Now, if he's supposed to be this tongue-in-cheek wake-up call to the British white masses, and people are proud for him to be the poster boy and the representation of that, that's up to them. I just don't think that type of interaction is healthy. But I do invite and encourage these types of conversations. Conversations where it's not always about kumbaya, let's hold our hands and everything's peace and loving, let's Jack and Jill went down the hill. I'm not for that. I like the type of engagement where we can sit in a room, know exactly where we lean ideologically, try convey to each other respectfully what we believe to be the truth, see the merit of ideas, exchange them, and if you agree, you agree. If you disagree, you disagree.
Right. It's always important to find the areas in which people overlap. That is the sort of rich seam which you can plough to make a harmonious society.
I'm not even going to pretend to say that there aren't major, like literally in your face cultural differences with white Europeans, because there's even that between Western Europeans and Eastern Europeans. There's even a distinct cultural difference between like France, Germany, Austria, Britain, France. And then you've got the Mediterranean. There's even cultural differences between the Western Europeans, the Scandinavians, the Slavic nations. But so, of course, there's going to be differences with those who are coming from Africa and Asia.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
If there's differences even between those countries in the Arab world and the Muslim majority world, cultural differences between certain parts of Africa, Middle East, Arab world, South Asia, Far East, of course there's going to be undeniable, bloody, in-your-face cultural manifestations of different flavors of the world. All I'm saying is that who decided from this camp, who decided that this is the setup that we're going to have? Who incentivized this setup? Who made this setup necessary for our economies to run on? Who decided that? Maybe channel our collective anger at them.
So I do that, don't you worry.
Brothers,
one day I'll be Prime Minister and you can be my faith advisor.
Nah, never that. Then you'll have people like, because there's this whole debate about Tory leadership and how true are they committed to kind of like the traditional right. Badenoch, Rishi Sunak, so many prominent people of colour taking positions. And there's other nationalists are like, you will truly never be nationalist until you understand that you simply can't have people like this in these positions of influence and power.
Really?
Yeah, I've heard that from many. These are maybe ethno-nationalists.
Yeah.
These are maybe ethno-nationalists for sure.
It's interesting because when I look at the immigrant communities from the Commonwealth, they are more socially conservative than we are, as we've discussed. We've thrown all that stuff into the bin. Centuries of tradition that
What do you want
well.
to see more from the Muslims? If you could speak to my people, my audience.
So what I would like to see more of is, understand that it is natural to humans. Natural, whether you like it or not, it's natural to humans to have an edge of fear, of xenophobia, of distrust from people or a religion that's not yours. That's just inbuilt into us as a tribal species, as much as it's natural for a man to want to look at a woman, etc. It's kind of part of the human condition. So get that, first of all. And in that regard, if you're not the sort of person who makes an effort to reach out, to talk, to have the sort of conversation like we're having, maybe try and do that, sort of sit there and be like, God, isn't it shit what's going on in the world? And let's talk about it in a way that let's find the areas of commonality. I think that where there's evidence there's been cultural issues connected to predominantly Muslim communities, I think we need to hear more Muslim voices coming out and condemning it, right? We need to hear more Muslim voices on television saying, this was wrong and this has been, we need to hear the moderate Muslim voices saying that school teacher should not be in hiding anymore. That is obscene.
Yeah, no teacher should be in hiding, but
that teacher should, and saying to the people who turn up with the placards and go, death threats, what do you think you're doing? It needs the moderate Muslims to say to them, put your blimmin' placard away and go home. You're not doing anyone any
what if the
favours.
moderate Muslims also found the cartoon offensive?
Yeah, but I'm afraid you can find something offensive, but making that poor man who probably
agreed, no one should be in hiding.
You don't turn up at the school gates with placards and shouting death threats. That's not the way to go about things in life. You can turn around and go, look, please don't do that again. It's kind of offensive. Fine, done. Lesson learned. So where we do have examples of behaviour that is un-Islamic, then be brave enough. Be brave enough for the Muslims themselves to call it out, because that is more powerful and potent, because white people feel like they can't, right? White people feel like they can't say, it's frankly not on that, these people are turning up placards and shouting, da, 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 da. It's not on that, this is being said or that's it. It's, like you said, there's this hypersensitivity. So we need you guys to also do your bit.
What if, thank you for that, Alex.
In the same way that if there was some sort of mad end-of-world Christian cult right now going around and, behaving like lunatics, Westboro Baptist Church type sort of level, on steroids, then I as a Christian would be the first one to say this is not anything to do with me and want to shut it down. So I think we need to see a lot more courage from Muslim organisations and going, where's that school teacher? He must come out of hiding. He must be protected. And we're going to say to anybody who wants to turn out with a placard, this is, we're going to fight back against this.
What if I convey exactly what you said verbatim? And the answer or response that I get is that Muslims protesting against any issue, whether it's related to schools, education, or any matter, is merely us exercising our civic right to protest peacefully within the law. Where a law has been broken, in the case of death threats, incitement, there should be prosecution, arrests. No teacher should be in hiding. But what would you say to those within my community who say that when you have seen Muslims angry over the depiction of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, in cartoons which we see as offensive or blasphemous, that when we protest against it in public, that is merely us exercising a right that every other faith
But is there
community
not a
has.
proportionality here, right? It was one school teacher who was a young
No, I'm talking
guy.
generally. I'm talking generally on any issue that...
Proportionality.
Yeah.
That's all I would say when it comes to this. You know, when the two kids at Manchester Airport were arrested, you know, there's no need to go and sort of all gang around outside a police station. Just don't. You didn't do that. You didn't go... You know, it's this sort of thing. Don't... You know... Don't do things that you might think are going to be provocative when it's a human condition to live in fear. In the same way that if I went to Morocco and walked around in a miniskirt, what am I doing? I mean, plenty of women now do that, unfortunately. You go to Morocco and you see a lot of female tourists who are literally going around the souks thinking they're in Sex and the City. But, you know, and I'm like, it's a Muslim country. Cover yourself up. Be respectful. Not just for your sake, but for their sake. They don't want to see this. That's not how they live. How dare you come into this country and just go, well, I'm just going to walk around in a bikini. Like, no. So in the same way, don't, you know, just, it's within the sort of guile and gumption and common sense of any logical man or woman or child to see proportionality and know what's going to provoke, what isn't, what's the right course of action, what isn't, when there can be diplomacy and dialogue, and when there really is a need to go out and start waving placards and shouting, you know, what other people might consider to be quite extreme slogans, even if you're, oh, well, you know, internalised, but it doesn't mean this in our religion or in our culture. But you probably have an idea that other people out there will find this provocative or alarming. So moderate that. That's being human. That's being sort of trying to sort of find the common denominator and being compassionate and being empathetic and understanding, being sort of sensible. And I think that that would be a really good approach as well, because we're having a lot more now. And it's not, I'm just saying, this isn't like a Muslim thing. It's all blimmin' identitarians out there, whether it's the LGBTQ lot, the trans rights lot, you know, everyone's so quick to get a badge and wave a flag and go on a march and shout and provoke. Just stay at home and have a blimmin' conversation, would you?
Wicked. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, your political journey was, again, interject, UKIP?
Yeah.
Brexit?
Yeah.
Tory?
That was a sort of like very quick flash in the pan for all of about
and
a
now
second.
currently Reform?
Yeah, I
Ish.
mean, ish.
Okay,
because I broadcast, so I sort of I'm bound by
no,
the
of
rules
course,
of
by
Ofcom.
impartiality, sure.
But if I wasn't a broadcast, I think people know where I would be. Yeah.
In terms of, how do you define British? Who qualifies to describe themselves as British? Because this is another a huge discussion among that white nationalists need to have amongst themselves, right? What does being British mean? Because there's, and I'm going to ask you as someone who was affiliated directly or indirectly, subscribed to it entirely, mostly, partially, to those said political parties or types of thinking. Would it at least be inaccurate to say that you lean on the right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even believe in the terms left and right. But
Nor do I.
That's my camp, and it always has been.
It's quite
the
unfortunate.
Farage camp.
Yeah,
It's always been my
yeah,
camp.
and it's unfortunate because now we're living at a time where everyone has to have a label, everyone has to have categorized, and that's fine. It is what it is. How do you define someone is British?
Not by skin colour. Let me make it clear. I don't think skin colour comes into necessarily a national identity, but what is being British? Speaking English is being British.
Boom.
This is the language.
So language. Okay,
this
good.
is because that's very important, I'm afraid. You know, you should be able to speak the language of the country that you call home in order that you can communicate with your neighbours. Can I have a cup of sugar? Do you want me to mow the bit of your lawn? Whatever. So that's point one.
So that's a lot of our mums and aunts out of the question because they've been here for 30, 40 years and many of them don't know English.
And I think that's a great pity because it
I
means
think it's
they're
sad.
socially excluded.
I think there should have been, and I'm talking from my own mother's perspective. I've never shared this. There you go, a little exclusive from me to you. My mum has been in England. She sees it as home. And if you ask her, Mum, why is the UK home? Even when the riots were happening and stuff, right? This ain't like a violent sob story. I'm literally just asked my mum, because Mum, look, they're rioting here and there because they think they hate X, Y, and Z. They hate Muslims and they hate things. Some of the riots where migrant hotels were being attacked or mosques were attacked. Mum goes, this is my home. I go, Mum, you don't even know the English. You can't even articulate why you love the country to the Englishman, Mum. She goes, but this is my home. This is where I'm safe and secure.
It makes me sad that I can't go and sit and have a cup of tea and
You
go
can.
chin
You
wag
can.
with
No,
her
no, she'll
about
try.
what was
She'll try speaking English. She'll try, and she'll fail miserably, bless her heart. But she is a reflection and representation of a generation of women who came in the 70s, early 70s. That first generation, the wives of the first generation, who came here as young brides and young wives, who were entirely homemakers. Some of them might have branched out to work, and therefore they had access.
But I just think
I agree with you.
To talk is so
I agree.
important.
You know what?
It's how you.
I agree.
Where I've lived in the world, right? I've lived in Ghana, I've lived in Kenya, I've lived in southern India, I've lived in China. The one that I really didn't feel comfortable and didn't enjoy being there was China. Why? Because I couldn't speak the language and they couldn't speak mine. It's that simple.
We do.
You're alone.
As Brits, we do go around the world, and we do expect everyone to speak English.
Yeah, well, but of course, because we didn't colonise China, missed that one. A bit sloppy there.
So language
is really important. And then I think you do need a sort of shared. There's an element of shared history and custom that comes about from living somewhere, and defining those things are quite difficult because they vary, and they're sort of not they're flexible and they're not immutable. But whether it be roast dinner on a Sunday,
match of the day, football team, top of the pops,
yeah, exactly. Those things.
Certain banter,
right? Exactly.
Certain humour, that you can't share with an Italian, and I can't share with a Bangladeshi.
Exactly.
But we can.
That is, that's the stuff because that is stuff that is unique, that is bespoke to Britain, that makes Britain Britain. And so now, another thing that makes Britain is drinking 10 pints in the pub and going for curry. Ironically, So it's these things they evolve, but it's important that people coalesce around an idea, a vision of things that are shared, of commonality. And so whatever that is in terms of the stuff of Britain, it changes. The royal family, that's a big one,
Do you think secular liberalism, do you accept that secular liberalism is generally the state ideology of most Western nation states?
Yeah.
And do you think it facilitates that type of society?
No, I think it does the opposite. And I think that what we've got now is a world that increasingly wants to silo people and categorise them based upon race, based upon religion, based upon sexual identity. Well, all these categories now. You've got to have all your categories.
Yeah, you need to.
What about just being Dilly and Alex, hanging out and having a chat?
For sure.
That's what it should be all about. So that, I think, is important, and that is the element of integration, but it's where I also do like an element of assimilation, because I think that it engenders even more commonality.
Well, I can't promise assimilation as someone who's not an advocate of it, but I can say to you that I believe, and I think you will continue to see, Muslim integration, and you will actually see whether I like it or not, or whether you like it or not. We will see. If Muslims decide to stay in Britain and in Western Europe, you will see an increased percentage of assimilation. I think there'll be a tug of war internally amongst Muslims. Those who want to remain more religiously devout, and allow that to shape their definition of what British and belonging means. And those will be like, hey guys, we've been here for nearly 100 years now. We need to kind of assimilate like other communities have. And I think there will be that tug of war. And I think that the more devout will win that tug of war. So as long as Western societies continue to be hedonistic and godless, the religious will always win the tug of war.
Yeah.
Once society becomes more religious or more inclined towards God, the conversation now changes to which God? What God? Your God or my God? And you start comparing and benefiting from each other's lifestyles and learning. But when it's godless and there's a market with everything there, and one is more louder than the other, or one is perceived to be given more rights than the other, that's going to create tensions.
Yeah, that is what hell looks like.
And on that note, I will wrap up. Brothers, sisters and friends, I hope you all enjoyed this conversation as much as I did with Alex, and to kick off season 4. If you liked it, do remember to click subscribe to the 5 Pillars YouTube channel, and you can find it on all major audio platforms. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum. Alex, over to you to wrap up.
Yeah, well, there you go. I just want to say it's amazing, isn't it? A 2.5-hour conversation. Like I said, we've probably beaten Joe Rogan at this point. Yeah. It's been really valuable, valuable. And I hope you also watching have found this to be a really interesting conversation. And let more of these happen.
For sure, definitely. Thank you, Alex.
Right.
Take care.